The post lamps flickered to life, illuminating the beige Model B that sat idle by the curb. Within, Detective Rick Sawyer brushed the back of his hand across his forehead, pulling away thick beads of sweat. He had spent the last few years riding solo. His last partner, Mitch, had been taken down during a failed robbery attempt, and sharing it with someone else almost felt wrong. He simply had to be more careful. A thin paper roll sat between his lips and smoke billowed occasionally from the driver window. He would finish it off and head off for his rounds. The air was molasses, but Rick could smell the rain coming. It was mid-July in Cincinnati. The heat would almost make the devil cry, and storms were as unpredictable as Jerry Lewis. In an instant, the heavens opened and the police cruiser was bombarded with droplets. He cursed a bit before flicking the remainder of his cigarette out into the flood and rolled out the window. His shift was almost over, but he would need to make one more round through the neighborhood before heading home. Might as well get the show over with, he told himself while the engine roared to life. A replay of the Reds game lulled on the radio, the announcer commenting on the talent of a pitcher named Joe Nuxel. Rick shook his head at the thought of a 15-year-old major leaguer. Just as the thought had passed, his eyes caught sight of a man standing under a street lamp about a block down. He leaned against the post despite the rain pelting him. He was a tall, slender man with a light gray business suit clinging to his frame. One could easily tell the weather had destroyed what might have been a clean-cut look. Rick couldn't quite understand why he would just stand there in this downpour, but figured he must be stranded or something. The tires of the coupe diverted to the other side of the road, and the brakes squealed to a stop. As the detective leaned over the passenger side to lower the window, he noticed the man was flipping a coin in one hand. This seemed even odder considering the circumstances. Once the barrier between them dropped, Rick called out in the elements. "You all right, pal?"
"Just waiting on my ride,"
the stranger said, not seeming fazed by the fact that he looked as though he just fell out of the local swimming pool. Rick's brow furrowed, feeling slightly unnerved by how nonchalant this guy seemed to be. After a moment of silence, the detective spoke again. "It's getting pretty rough out here. Is there somewhere I can take you?" The man's hand snapped closed on the coin finally, and the sudden motion made Rick's hand slide to his service pistol by instinct. Rick's eyes trained on the other hand that remained in the guy's pocket during his approach. The hand pulled free of the stranger's slacks and held nothing in it. Rick relaxed and watched as the man leaned down to the window before agreeing. Most people would not have taken the offer so lightly, but this man honestly didn't seem bothered in the slightest by his plight. Something was wrong, Rick could tell, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. And something in his smile and the ease of his words only served to unsettle the detective. And as the passenger door opened, Rick's .38 Special slid from its holster and rested on his lap. Rick knew the weapon would be covered by his coat, and this way it was ready if he needed it. His passenger took a seat and closed the door and gave the detective a smile.
"Thanks."
The man's words came dripping like the rest of them. Rick tried not to think of having to clean the upholstery because he was sure that this was the least of his problems at this particular moment. Rick asked his destination, and when he received his answer, he fought the urge to curse the thought of having to drive across town. The trip would put him an hour late coming home, and he knew his wife wouldn't be too happy. Instead, he simply put the car in gear and made his way out of the neighborhood in silence. The quiet was unnerving, Rick's hand tightening on the steering wheel. His words tried to cut the thickness. "So, what are you doing out in this mess anyway?" The man's head tilted slightly, and his eyes squinted a bit as if he had to think of a good answer. Rick had seen many guilty men look at him this way when they were trying to come up with an alibi, and the whole scene caused his thumb to rest on the hammer of his pistol. The man began turning the coin between his fingers and gave a slight smile before ever responding.
"Just headed down south to visit an old friend of mine. I hear he's a musician now and Doing pretty good for himself.
The guy's voice became upbeat. Rick wasn't sure what was more unsettling, the silence or the smile.
Speaking of which,
The stranger paused and pointed to the dash.
you mind if I find us some music?
Rick really wasn't in the mood for music now, but it would be better than listening to his new passenger talk. A nod signaled an agreement, and the man's fingers twisted at the dial. Static and garbled signals went by for a few seconds before the station came in clear. Wailings of a guitar and the slow, somber tones that old colored folks spoke about came blaring through the speakers. Definitely hadn't expected a well-dressed white man to listen to this kind of music, but if it kept him quiet, that was all the better. 20 minutes later, the cruiser came to a stop in front of an apartment building that took up the block. The windows seemed boarded and the whole neighborhood felt more like a grave. It couldn't have been someone's home, and Rick knew this. The concern must have been clearly printed on the detective's forehead, because when the passenger noticed, he laughed slightly. The sound snatched Rick from his thoughts, and a low metallic click could be heard as the pressure of his thumb became more than the hammer spring could hold back anymore. Rick brushed the sticky liquid away that collected under his hairline again, as the man began to point out the window. The detective's eyes followed and came to rest on the flickering light of a phone booth. It sat upon the corner of the intersection approximately 20 feet away. Rick wanted to scream, but bet against it. They had passed at least 3 dozen payphones during this trip. What made this one so special? The detective couldn't take it anymore. Not trying to be rude, mister, but why did we have to go across town to this payphone? The man gave that sick, toothy smirk again and slid his hand toward his coat breast pocket. Rick's hand gripped the pistol now and ready to bring it into play. The hand emerged holding a pack of cigarettes that the passenger shook slightly, the smile growing. Rick felt like he was being taunted by this guy, and every second his pistol shook more in his hand. He hadn't had to discharge his firearm since he lost Mitch. The incident still left a mark on his memory, and right now, it made it difficult not to draw on the stranger. The possibilities of what would follow streamed through his head. The man had brought him to a secluded part of the city, and every look and word seemed to mock the detective. Even now, as his passenger pressed a cigarette between his lips and lit the tip, that smile still lingered on the corners of his mouth. The lid to the lighter snapped closed, causing Rick to jolt slightly.
Where I am headed is this way. Thanks for the ride, friend.
The stranger said, as he flipped the coin into the air. It turned a few times before coming to rest on the dashboard. It wobbled along the edge for a moment before stopping flat. Now that it was closer, the detective could see that one side appeared gold and the other silver. A star was etched on the face of it, but not any star Rick had ever seen previously. The marks weren't machine-made, that's for sure. The click of the door opening pulled the detective's eyes back to the passenger. He was already lifting himself back up into the rain with a still-lit cigarette. The drops quickly snuffed out the smoke, and the man awkwardly just held it there at any rate. Then the man leaned back to the window and pointed to the dashboard again.
That's my friend singing now. I think you might like it,
he quipped, before turning to walk toward the phone booth. Rick watched the man for a moment, but the word to the song drew his attention. A young man's voice wailed over sharp guitar riffs. The voice seemed to be asking for help and not receiving any. The next verse began, and the words seemed to echo in Rick's ears. He turned to look up at the man again, now standing in the phone booth.
Yo standing at the crossroad. Tried to flag a ride. Oh, I tried to flag a ride. Didn't nobody seem to know me, babe. Everybody passed me by.
Rick watched intently as the stranger pulled another coin from his pocket. It caught the glow inside the booth, and the detective could tell it was a duplicate of the one that now sat on his dash. Rick took the small sliver of metal in his hand, running his thumb along the etching as the song continued to flow through his cab.
Standing at the crossroad, baby. Rising sun going down. Standing at the crossroad, baby. Rising sun going down. I believe to my soul now. Poor Bob is sinking down.
A chill rose up Rick's back, and he could feel the hair on his neck rise. Rick put the car in drive and eased forward, watching the man lift the receiver. As he passed, the figure waved and gave another smirk before fingering in his desired number. The wailing permeated throughout the cruiser for the next verse.
And I went to the crossroad, Mama. I looked east and west. I went to the crossroads, baby. I looked east and west. Lord, I didn't have no sweet woman, oh well, babe, in my distress.
The song ended while Rick put the car in reverse. He came to a stop once more under the light of the phone booth, and the announcer began clamoring about the previous artist, Robert Johnson. The voice elaborated on his talent but changed to a sorrowful tone when he expressed his condolences to any friends or family that may be listening. Then another song was announced, stating the artist released it the year he died, 1938. Rick had been staring at the booth until those words rang out and was pulled back to the radio. He spoke to himself in the dark. That can't be right. That was 6 years ago. The next song began to play as Rick sat dazed at his experience. He looked down at the coin and turned it in his fingers again to see the opposite side had another crudely drawn star symbol. He had been shaken, and pistol still gripped in his palm. The stranger smiled at Rick again as a detective stepped from the car finally. His gun drew across the top of the car as he yelled out, "Who the hell are you?" The stranger stepped out of the booth still holding the phone.
You can call me Scratch,
he said with a wink.
I've got to be going now, Rick.
You're not going anywhere until I find out what's going on here, the detective yelled out into the night. Scratch laughed in a sly and amused tone.
I don't think you quite get it, my friend. But when you do, just use that coin I gave you. I will be seeing you around. Maybe you and I can make a deal too.
And with that, he stepped back into the booth and dropped his coin into the slot. Rick barked at the man, "Freeze!" And just as the words rang out, the man faded away, his body dissipating like smoke across the stars. The shock caused the detective to pull the trigger, and the crack of the shot and breaking glass echoed through the street. The receiver shattered still in midair before tumbling to the floor of the booth. Rick's eyes drew open wide and his mouth hung open agape. Slowly, his knees gave out beneath him, and his body sat back to the driver's seat. Then, sliding his hand under his coat, he removed a small chrome tin container. Twisting the cap loose, he turned it up to his lips. He rarely drank, but this moment seemed like the right opportunity for a few sips. He took another drink as he contemplated the previous 45 minutes. The thought came slowly, but like a slap in the face. Who had been in my car? And how the hell did he know my name? A star-spangled blanket draped over the pine box as Brian stood steady. He had to be strong for his mother, who was currently buried against his borrowed black suit, sobbing heavily. He only flinched when the crack of the rifles echoed through the air. Men in uniform, both military and Cincinnati police, gave their respects. Tokens of gratitude coated the coffin, and a neatly folded flag was placed in his mother's hands. She clutched it tightly, as if it were the only thing in the world. Brian rubbed her back and stared down toward a box containing a stranger. He had not had a chance to know his father, despite all he had heard from his mother and his father's friends. Each one had a story about Rick Sawyer, his heroism and bravery, honesty and loyalty. He was the greatest man many of them had ever known. That wasn't the man Brian knew. His father was an empty seat at dinner and a vacant placeholder during school events. Brian's mother always assured him that his father loved him, just hadn't been as affectionate since his time in the war. Brian never knew. Those 3 words had never come, and now they never would. The last thing his father ever told him was that the world was an evil place, and that he should be wary of it. He left that day more confused, lost, and angry than ever. After walking his mother to her car, he found a place on a bench at the edge of the cemetery to think. Reaching up, he brushed at his hair and pushed away his perspiration. The long, draping hair, in style for his age, made it unbearable in the summer months. His mother would always say he looked so much like a younger version of his father. Thinking about that now made tears well up around his green eyes. The crowd slowly left the plot, but one remained, leaning over to place a small gift upon the headstone. Brian couldn't place him as one of his father's fellow soldiers, officers, or friends, at least not the ones he had ever met. He was tall and thin, dressed fairly well even if slightly out of date. His hair was dark and slicked back, and made him look professional even in this dreary place. He was curious to see the gift that had been left there and quickly rose from the bench to investigate. Clouds closed over the sun as Brian approached the man and droplets began to tap at his shoulders. The figure turned away slightly toward Brian, and in turn, Brian tossed up a few fingers. He cursed to himself as the drops came quicker, his hair becoming matted to his face. He quickly pulled his jacket up over his head for shelter, but when his eyes returned to the gravesite, the man was gone. When his feet came to rest over his father's resting place, he turned in each direction in search of the final visitor. The man had disappeared, but his gift remained. Lifting what appeared to be a coin with an etching of what appeared to be a star, Brian examined each side. It was rough to the touch, jagged at the corners, and obvious to Brian that it had been done with a rough instrument. He shoved the trinket down into his pocket and sprinted toward his car for shelter. He looked for any sign of the man as he exited, but there was none. The next few months had been spent preparing for the sale of the family home. Brian's mother claimed she didn't think she could live in a home that constantly reminded her of Rick. Eventually, a potential buyer expressed interest, and any items that remained would need to be cleared out. The two of them had already found a smaller apartment that would suit their needs, and his mother didn't wish to return to the old home. Brian would be off to college soon, but he wanted to make sure he had everything taken care of beforehand. His mother still wasn't quite ready for him to go, and Brian knew this. But he also had a life that had been put on pause ever since his father's death. Brian offered to clean out the old house. He selfishly had his own reasons for wanting to go, though. He had always wanted to see what hid behind the door of his father's study. It had been a place he had so often been warned of, and this was his opportunity to learn a little bit about the man he seldom ever saw. It took a week to get the majority of the house packed away in boxes. Most wouldn't be making the move to the apartment. What they needed would come with Brian. The rest would be sold or donated. Brian saved one room for last intentionally, granting himself time to investigate. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the shiny bronze knob, remnants of days when the effort could lead to an argument. He honestly had no idea what he would find. Then, steeling his nerves, the knob turned and the door gave way. It was underwhelming at best. A small wooden desk with a lamp, a leather armchair tucked in the corner, a large bookshelf upon one wall, and file cabinets on the other. A window behind the desk illuminated the only mystery of the room, his father's work. Brian's hands feathered at the papers, mostly news articles and files that hadn't been returned to their place. Everything had already been coated in a very thin layer of dust. He picked them up one at a time and shuffled through them and sorted each in its specific boxes. After clearing out the file cabinets and removing the books from all the shelves, Brian took to the desk. Each drawer filled their own box, and he neatly printed Dad's study on each one. Bending down, he reached for the last drawer at the bottom. The drawer fought back, and an audible clink was heard. "Damn, locked," Brian huffed. He dug through his pockets for the set of keys his mother had given him. It took a few minutes, shuffling through 24 keys before finding one that would fit. Brian paused for a moment before opening it. Standing there in a once forbidden room, opening the only thing that was locked was almost adventurous. He could feel a smile play on his lips, like a pirate opening a chest, surely full of treasure. As the drawer opened, Brian's eyes fell on something less than astonishing. The most notable item, at first glance, was the bottle of scotch and the glass to accompany it. He had never witnessed his father drink, and couldn't recall a time alcohol had been in the home. He smirked a little at the thought of his dad sneaking a drink in those late nights in here alone. He lifted the bottle and glass, sitting on the desk before removing the only other content of the drawer. It was a thick leather-bound folder, a leather binding wrapped around, then looped close upon a coin that had been fastened as a makeshift button. He reached to his pocket and removed the coin he had retrieved from his father's gravestone and noticed the resemblance. He placed the folder down next to the bottle of scotch and tapping a finger upon it. The dim remnants of the day began to fade away, and soon he found himself flicking on the old desk lamp and leaning over the folder. He wondered why something so simple had been hidden away from the world, and why the man had left another at his father's grave. His curiosity piqued, considering if anything within might give him some insight into who his father was, and maybe even who the man was at the funeral. He let his childhood memories fill his mind as he reached for the bottle, and trying to recall if he might have met this person at some point. The cap turned freely, and the amber liquid soon half-filled the glass, remembering the last time he was scolded for attempting to enter this room. Brian lifted it and turned it in his hand, the light refracting through the liquid and tinting the desk ahead. He took a quick sip, the burning trickling down his throat, before placing the glass down and grabbing for the folder. Unwinding the fastening and laying it open, he was greeted by a collection of various things. First was an envelope, then a journal, and then a stack of smaller files that included their own stacks of paper. He lifted the envelope and took another sip of scotch before pulling a wrinkly, yellow letter from within the matching envelope. He instantly recognized the writing, even behind the stains of dirt and grime. It was shadows of his father. His thumb caressed the page as he stood up from the desk, shoving the coin down in his pocket for later. Then he grabbed the glass and downed a quick swig while reading what appeared to be a letter to his mother. He had seen many of these that his mother kept, but not this one. It had never been mailed, and that made it even more interesting. August 15th, 1944. We have taken the beaches along the Riviera. The locals keep calling it something I can't pronounce. My sergeant said that the Germans were weakened already, and that this was going to be an easy fight. He must have been in the shit a while, since this was his idea of easy. I found moments of fear, I can't lie, especially seeing how many men we lost. Wilkins seems to think that this will be the worst of it, and he's been here longer than me, so I have to trust his word on that one. The main reason I'm writing this is I saw something I wanted to get down on paper. I've heard stories of men losing it out here and seeing things that aren't there. I don't know if I really saw him, and I haven't told anyone else about it for that very reason. I just need a record of it, and hopefully make sense of it when I'm out here. That is, if I get out of here. We were passing through an area near Cannes, and at a half-destroyed cafe, I saw him sitting at a table, sipping coffee just like any other Tuesday evening. He even seemed to ignore the troops that passed him by, just as much as the troops ignored him. Then he suddenly noticed me, raised his glass as if toasting, and took a sip. He gave me that smile again. There's no reasonable explanation for him being here, half a world away from where I saw him just a month ago, but there he was. Scratch was here, and I have no idea why. PFC, Rick Sawyer. Brian sat back down, still holding the letter, wrinkles forming on his forehead. He had never heard the name Scratch before. Maybe it was a nickname of someone his father once knew. He pondered this as he laid the letter down and began to unwrap the leather binding upon the folder. As it fell open, the first page was just words in series. Something like you would do if you had been brainstorming an essay. Scratch, Coin, Robert Johnson, Mississippi is how it started, and articles have been folded up in the creases of the book. Brian pressed them open to reveal a message that had information about a young black man dying in Greenwood, Mississippi. At the bottom of the page was 2 drawings, one that resembled the coin that Brian now possessed, and the other looked remarkably like the man he had seen at his father's funeral. Scratch. Brian read the words under the image and wondered if it really was the same man. He seemed to have stumbled on his mystery, and it was getting interesting. He had finished his glass without realizing and tried to pour nothing but air down his gullet. He shook his head a bit before refilling his glass and taking a bit down and turning the page. Directions had been left that would lead someone from Cincinnati, Ohio, all the way to Greenwood, Mississippi. He scanned down the page, noting each turn, and once it ended, he turned the page. Again, folded between the pages, there was more paper that unfolded into road maps. The highways had markings on them in pen as if someone had been keeping track of their destination. The following page had more notes, each line including names and statements. The whole page and the following seemed to be from interviews that his father had conducted once reaching his destination. David Pelham, 44, October 2nd, 1950, Greenwood, Mississippi. According to witness, Robert Johnson was murdered by a man that had caught him sleeping with his wife. Local police reports do not suggest this, and neither does my experience. Bobby Wyatt, 39, October 3rd, 1950, Greenwood, Mississippi. Common rumors say that Robert Johnson made a deal with the devil. His talent was unnatural. Huh. Sounds like Scratch. Regina Moore, 32, October 3rd, 1950, Greenwood, Mississippi. Rumor has it that the deal was made 60 miles north of here, Clarksdale, Mississippi. Willie Brown, 62, October 4th, 1950, Greenwood, Mississippi. Received directions to an intersection, Highway 61 and 49, Clarksdale, Mississippi, Devil's Crossroads. Intersection 6149, October 5th, 1950, Clarksdale, Mississippi. 2 roads intersecting. There was a phone booth, but no scratch. Patrons at Abe's Barbecue, October 5th, 1950, Clarksdale, Mississippi. Most people were hesitant to even speak to me, and I didn't get many answers. No one knows more than I learned back in Greenwood, and no one has heard of a man named Scratch. The owner suggests I speak to the musicians that perform at the local club. After speaking to a few musicians who knew or know Robert Johnson, I am inclined to believe that the rumors have hit a dead end on my leads. No one knows Scratch, but a few of them have noted a man by that description frequenting the club. Brian sat back amazed at the continuing list of names and statements, unsure what to make of it. Everything pointed to a completely impossible notion, and that was that his father had been looking for the devil himself in Mississippi of all places. The liquor warmed his throat again as he shook his head. He paused and scanned the now empty room for a moment before letting out a little chuckle. This had to be a joke, and it was simply left to taunt him, Brian thought. He flipped through the pages, scanning the notes and unfolding newspaper articles that had been left sporadically throughout the journal. All of them seemed to point toward the same unbelievable fact. The more he read, the more real it all seemed to become. His humor was replaced by a growing sense of fear. Small sketches became regular occurrences at the bottom of his entries. Most of them were symbols that meant nothing to Brian, but others seemed to depict rituals involving sacrifice. The further he read, the more grotesque they became, and soon started to truly worry about his father's mindset. His fingers turned to the final page, realizing it to be another letter. Brian almost spat his newly consumed scotch when he realized it was directed to him. Dear son, I know that if you're reading this, it may very well be too late, but I'd like to start with an apology. I haven't been the father you needed or deserved. I've made many mistakes in my life, but know that you are not one of them. Do not ever let my actions or lack thereof take away from your experience in this life. I wish the best for you always. If you've taken the time to read these passages and feel like your old man has become crazy, I would understand completely. Trust me in this. There is evil out there. And even though you never truly understood when I said so, please listen to me now. Do not go looking for Scratch. There are some things you cannot undo, and I would not wish that on you for anything. If he approaches you, for the love of God, do not make him a deal. The price is so great you will not be able to repay it. I hope you learn from my mistakes and rely on the things in this journal as proof. Take care of your mother and yourself. Please forgive me for what I have done. I love you. Dad. Brian had turned into a drunken, sobbing mess upon finishing the letter. He had so many questions that were unanswered, but the one that meant the most had been finalized in his farewell. My father loved me, he whispered to the dark, wiping away the years of uncertainty that had drenched his cheeks. He placed the letter, the journal, and the bottle into a box for scribbling the word, Brian's, on the lid. As he pulled into the parking space of the apartment complex, Brian was still brushing away tears. He didn't want his mother to worry about him any more than she already did. He simply grabbed at the gift his father had left him and made his way up the steps. Upon entering, he could see the dim glow of the kitchen light. His mother had waited up for him again. "Brian," she called from the next room. He assured her it was only him and walked in, placing the box upon the counter. She gave him a faint smile. "All finished?" Brian nodded and stepped in to hug her. She laughed a little and squeezed back before questioning. "What's gotten into you tonight?" He released his hold on her and smiled sheepishly, still unsure if he should ask her about his father so soon. Stepping back, Brian rested his hand on the box and pondered for a moment how to bring up the question he needed to ask. "Well," he started and paused again. He hadn't wanted to upset his mother, but he had to know about Mississippi. After a few moments of debating, he gave in to his curiosity. "I don't remember Dad taking many road trips, but I found some directions to Mississippi amongst some of his things. It looked pretty interesting." "Huh." She blushed a bit. "I haven't thought about that in a long time." Her eyes turned to the floor as she smiled, getting lost in a memory. "No, you wouldn't remember that," she said, finally looking up to her son. "You weren't even a year old then." Brian pushed a little harder, wondering what sparked his father's interest in the South. "He went down to visit a friend of his from the war," she said, nodding to herself, as if she was trying to verify her thoughts with facts. Brian leaned in as she spoke, intently waiting for his answer. "Yeah, that's what it was. Your father swore he would have never made it back if it wasn't for him and wanted to thank him personally and see how he was doing," she continued, as if the moment in time was coming back to her in pieces. She sat down slowly at the table where she had left a cup of coffee, her hands forming around it slowly. Brian couldn't help himself. "Mom, do you remember his friend's name?" She tilted her head slightly, her eyes squinting as she searched for the answer. She shook her head gently. "No, he always referred to his buddies by those silly nicknames they gave one another over there. She called him, Scotch? Brian's eyes widened a bit. "Scratch?" His mother smiled, clapping her hands together before pointing toward her son. "That's it. How did you know?" That night, As Brian settled into bed, he found himself thinking of all the things he had discovered. His life had not been quite as he had thought, and now he must consider the truth of it all. His father hadn't despised him. He hadn't hated him, and he may have kept his distance to keep him safe. All of this swirled about in his mind until his eyes grew heavy and he drifted off to sleep. His dreams had become a collaboration of the events of his day. He envisioned himself at the desk again, reading about his father. The words drew him in close and the scene changed, much like a movie. The light dimmed and the clouds rolled overhead. He found himself sitting amongst rubble, confusion setting in. It wasn't a place he was familiar with, and the dream seemed so real that he could smell smoke in the air. He explored the battered building he stood in, death and destruction greeting him. And coming to a stop amongst a group of soldiers, his eyes fell upon a man that he knew to be his father. Large streams of salty liquid came from his father's eyes. He seemed to be praying, but his words had been muffled by the sound of gunfire. Brian knelt beside his father, but seemed to be unnoticed. After a few moments, his father stood slowly, pulling a coin from his pocket. He began to limp across the room before stumbling against a payphone on the other side. Brian followed him at each step and watched as his father picked up the receiver and dropped the coin in the slot. Within seconds, the man he had come to know as Scratch appeared at his father's side. A wicked grin played across his lips as he patted his father on the shoulder. They spoke to one another, but the words seemed garbled. Brian drew closer in an attempt to hear. He must have come within a foot of the two of them before hearing the words,
"So, we have a deal."
The words poured out from Scratch's sinister smile as he extended a hand. Brian's father shook it and nodded. Brian tried to scream out to his father. He tried to beg him to stop, but his words never came. With every effort, only silence found him. Then, in an instant, Scratch turned toward the young man that no one else could manage to see. He drew closer, and Brian attempted to back up, his feet stumbling over the rubble. He came crashing down, but no sound could be heard. Scratch hovered over him for a moment, his eyes now glowing a sickly yellow. Before Brian could react, the man lunged at him with mouth agape. His jaw opened unnaturally, growing large enough to swallow Brian whole. Again, he tried to scream in vain. Soon, he was enveloped by this thing and was plunged into darkness. Brian jolted upright in his bed, sweat cascading from his body. He leaned over to flick on the lamp at his bedside, air rushing in and out of his chest. He was still at home, in his bed and perfectly fine. The dream had made it all seem so real. He still felt dirty from landing on the floor. His hands brushed at his arms and fear crept up his spine, making him shudder. Grime had stained his clothes and bits of debris had accompanied him within the sheets of his bed. Unable to make sense of it all, his eyes turned to the coin that rested by his lamp. Reaching for it, he began turning it between his fingers and thinking of the last line of Rick Sawyer's final words to his son. "Please forgive me for what I have done." Brian flew down I-65 in his canary yellow Dodge Dart. It wasn't much to look at, but it was all he could afford at the time. He had haphazardly crammed what necessities he could into the cramped back seat the night before, prepping for his trip. There were questions that begged to be answered, and there was only one way to find them. Follow his father's directions. The leather-bound folder sat riding shotgun, and pages folded open along with the map. He tapped at the steering wheel in tune with the radio, keeping his eyes open for his next exit. He planned to stop at each designated spot, that is, as long as his money held out. His finger quickly flipped to a section that he had marked with a tap prior to his trip, guiding the car onto the off-ramp of exit 1A. The sign to his right welcomed him to Memphis, Tennessee. He pulled to a stop at the rest area, picking up the folder and placing it in his lap. He scanned over his father's words again as he prepared to make his first real stop on his journey. It had taken him around 7 hours to get to this point. but he knew he had to find out the truth. Beale Street Blues Club, Memphis, Tennessee, September 30th, 1950. I decided to make a stop in Tennessee. There seems to be a large blues community here, and maybe I can get pointed in the right direction. I've already asked a couple of people where to head to find the right scene. I'm being told about a backdoor club downtown. I get the eye walking in. Doubt they see many white men in places like this, but I'm here for a job, not entertainment. Many of the artists here have heard the story of Robert Johnson, and a few of them believe it. I've been told to look for an artist named Frank Stokes down in Mississippi. He used to be a regular here, but he seems to have moved down to Clarksdale. He's been speaking to a man that resembles Scratch's description. Brian searched for Beale Street on his map, finding it wasn't that hard, but the alley was more difficult. The buildings had changed after 18 years, and the place described in his father's notes just didn't exist anymore. This would make his mission more challenging, but not impossible. He began asking people who passed by, mainly the older crowd, if they had heard of this blues club. Some people ignored his questions entirely. Some had no idea what he was talking about, and others seemed to be angry he even asked. The whole task was frustrating, and after about an hour of bad luck, he found a bench to rest his feet. He had been sitting there, staring across the road for a few moments when a leathery hand landed on his shoulder. The sensation caused him to jump, and as he looked back up at the figure behind him, he came face to face with the wrinkled features of an aging old black man. He asked shakily, "Can I help you?" The man didn't respond, only stared down at Brian. He assumed he was staring, that is, considering he couldn't see his eyes behind the large-rimmed sunglasses that sat upon the man's face. "Sir?" Brian spoke again, as he tried to lean away. "I heard you're looking for some blues." The words spat out in a raspy tone through the man's jagged and rotting teeth. He patted Brian hard on the back and cackled a bit. "Come on, I can show you." He began hobbling away from the bench, a cane in the other hand. Brian simply watched for a moment, still trying to understand what was happening. The old man stopped, pivoted on the leg he seemed to be favoring, and spoke again. "Well, come on now, boy, I ain't got all day." Brian hopped up and shuffled over to the man. The two of them walked in silence down the block until reaching another alley. The old man didn't skip a beat before turning down the passage. Brian paused at the entrance, knowing this had to be the dumbest idea he had ever had. A canvas roof draped between the two buildings that sat on each side. The cloth blotted out the sun, and if the alley had been any darker, you would need a flashlight. "Come this way, the door's just here. I ain't gonna bite you, boy. I ain't got enough teeth." The old man said with a laugh, before making a chomping motion with his mouth. Brian's nose squinted at the sight of those ragged bits of yellow and black that remained. He had come this far, though, and decided he might as well see what was ahead. He slowly approached the door that the man had pointed at, seeing no handle, but only a porthole with a closed cover. "Just knock on the window and tell 'em Pete sent you. If they ask Pete who, tell 'em it's the only damn blind man that can still find his way to this shithole." The crass words fell out before another wicked laugh. Brian took a step toward the door, raising his shaking hand to form it into a fist. His knuckles rapped on the metal covering the window, causing an echo in the alley. Stepping back to wait, he shoved his hands down into his pockets. He turned to thank the man for his help and noticed that he was gone. His face wrinkled a bit in confusion at the sight. The man had been moving so slowly earlier, there was no way he could have made it back to the street so quickly. His curiosity was broken by the clink of the window opening and a faceless voice calling out, "Who's there?" But Brian, Pete sent me." Brian's voice cracking as he attempted to respond. Laughter could be heard on the other side of the door before the window shut. Brian's shoulders slumped down, and he shook his head in disappointment. I knew this was a dumb idea, he thought, right before a loud sound came from the door. Soon it swung open, and out stepped a dark-skinned man that towered over him. He had to be at least 6'7" and 400 pounds. He loomed over Brian for a moment, arms folded and confusion resting on his forehead. Finally, his voice rumbled. "What's a scrawny white boy like you hanging around that crazy old coot for? Matter of fact, what are you doing coming around here anyway? My people ain't taking too kindly to yours right now if you ain't seen the news." And suddenly, Brian felt the overwhelming urge to run. He was never sure that he had made a mistake following the blind man until right this moment. He had no idea what he was talking about. He had been so busy tending to funeral matters and helping his mother move that he had paid little attention to national matters. He mentally struggled for the words that might keep him from landing a beating in this dark alley, knowing that no one would hear him or see him here. "Listen, I wanted to see this blues club my dad used to talk about. I'm not really from here, so I'm not sure what you mean. You see, my dad passed away earlier this year, and I was following an old road trip plan he left behind." He gave a weak smile in an attempt to convince the man. The hulking figure looked Brian over for a moment, then looked around a bit before agreeing to let him in. Brian stepped up into a dimly lit hallway, and the sound of the metal door crashing shut made him jolt. "Head on down there through that door," the guard said, as he returned to the stool that sat by the door. Brian continued along a crimson-walled corridor, the hard wood floor creaking slightly under his steps. He could already smell the aromas from the room ahead. It was thick, almost to the point of choking him. You could tell that dozens of cigars and cigarettes created a wave of mist that billowed from the doorway. He reached the entrance and stepped just inside to bear witness to a ruckus. People hooped and yelled, danced, and sang along with the artists on stage. The band blared a melody of mixtures of trumpets, saxophones, drums, and guitar. Waitresses dressed scantily buzzed from table to table, taking and receiving orders, and dozens of men lined the bar, some speaking to one another, and others simply placing an order with the bartender. Brian slowly approached the counter, leaning his elbows against it. The bar went silent, all eyes falling on the palest person in the room. The bartender took a few steps in Brian's direction, still cleaning a glass with a towel. "Can I help you, son?" Brian almost missed the question. His eyes scanned the room and noticed that slowly everyone was watching him. He began to feel a knot growing in his throat, and sweat began to bead upon his forehead. He swallowed hard and tried to clear his throat. "My father came to a club like this a long time ago," he said, still looking around the room. "He passed away earlier this year, and I was visiting places he used to go, hoping someone knew him." The words finally falling from his mouth. The bartender gave a half smirk, almost as if he didn't believe him. "How long ago was this? 'Cause you're the first white boy I've seen in here in..." "Probably 18 years ago." His voice had dwindled off, as if he barely believed himself. The men around him erupted in laughter along with the bartender. After a few moments, the man behind the counter waved his hands around a bit to settle the uproar. "All right, okay, fellas, give the kid a break," he said in a calming tone before looking back to Brian. "Listen, kid, there isn't many people from back then here tonight, but if you want to ask some of those old folks at that table over there, be my guest." The thin finger pointed past Brian to a booth in the corner. 4 men sat peeking over toward the commotion, their eyes widening a bit at being singled out. The room slowly returned to life as Brian made his way through it. He overheard many of the patrons whispering about him, and it did little to settle his nerves. As he came to a stop at the table, each of the old men gave him a stern look. He wrung his hands for a moment. "I was just hoping one of you might have known a Rick Sawyer. He was my father." They all looked at one another for a moment, then back at Brian before shrugging and slightly shaking their heads. "He may have been in here asking about Robert Johnson," he continued. The man in the back corner sat forward a bit, and his eyes perked at the statement. You mean the cop?" he blurted out, in more of a statement than a question. Brian nodded in response. "Yeah, you boys remember that fella? He came in here talking about Robert and asking about that deal," he said in a matter-of-fact tone. It clicked in their heads, and they started agreeing and nodding, the man next to him pointing a finger toward Brian. "So that was your pops?" Again, Brian simply nodded in response, but the unease of the situation seemed to be tapering off. They didn't seem as shook by his presence anymore. Each one started conversing about their memories of Rick Sawyer and the night he came asking questions. "Well, what brings you here then, boy?" "I was hoping to find out what all you told him and ask if you knew anything about this," he said sharply, as he pulled the coin from his pocket. He turned it in between his index and thumb, the light glinting from it as it moved. The man at the back of the table stood up slowly, removing the cigar that had hung between his lips and letting it rest on his fingers. He leaned in toward Brian, and the rest of them simply fell silent, looking at the item in his hands. "Listen, boy, if you had any idea what you were really messing with, you wouldn't have brought that here. So I'm gonna tell you something, and then you're gonna walk right back out that door." His words cold and callous. Brian fell back into his nerves, almost shaking at the man's voice. "That right there is a ticket to hell, and you're on the highway. If that's what you're after, you ain't gotta travel far. But both Robert, your pops, and many, many others had to learn the hard way just what that means." Brian tried to explain, but he was cut off. No, you don't say another word. If you want to throw your life away, you take that coin of yours to a payphone and drop it in. He'll come to you, boy, but don't be thinking about doing it here," he said, before pointing toward the exit. Brian stuffed the coin in his pocket and turned toward the exit slowly and passed through the crowd that had fell silent at the tone of the old man's voice. Some of the ones closer to the table had overheard the conversation, and they scowled at him as he left. He lowered his head slightly when passing the bar. Everyone sat waiting for his exit. When he approached the doorman, Brian noticed him shaking his head with a smile. Told you you don't need to be up in here," he said with a laugh in his voice. The door was unlocked and pushed free, held open by the guard. Brian began to step down, and just as he was clear of the door, he turned to the man one more time with a question. "One more thing. What about Frank Stokes? Is he still down in Clarksdale?" The guard shook his head. "That cat died in 1955, just like you're gonna if you keep poking around in things you don't know nothing about." With that, the door slammed shut in Brian's face, and he was left alone in the dark alley. He sighed in disappointment, pulling the coin from his pocket again. It turned between his fingers as he thought about the warning he received and what was said about the payphone. He remembered his father dropping the coin in one within his dream. Was it really that easy to summon the devil? This thought echoed in his mind as he began walking toward the street. When he reached the end, he noticed the streetlights hum and slowly come to life. It was late. He was tired, and it would be far too dangerous to drive in this state. A shop owner nearby was kind enough to give him directions to the nearest lodging. It was only about a mile away, and he quickly pulled into the parking lot. The sign illuminated his car amongst the dark and read, "The Lorraine Motel." As he exited his car and stepped past a group of people to reach the door, he noticed how much attention he seemed to get. It was slightly unnerving how closely the group watched him enter the building. He quickly passed through the doorway and approached the front counter. A tawny-skinned young woman sat behind the desk, flipping through a magazine for a moment before Brian cleared his throat to signify his arrival. The woman jerked her head upward, obviously startled by the noise, and made eye contact with Brian. Her gaze seemed to widen slightly as she stood, approached the counter and asked, "Can I help you, sir?" Brian requested a room and the young woman seemed shocked. "Are you sure you want to stay here?" The idea that he wouldn't want to stay was confusing and led him to wonder why they wouldn't want his business. "Is there not a room available or something?" he questioned, annoyance in his voice. He had been on the road for many hours and had endured enough humiliation for one night. He simply wanted to go to bed and let this day wash away in dreams. "Well, it's not that, it's just, it may not be safe for you to stay here." Her voice cracked a bit in the reply. The thought of being unsafe made Brian instantly turn and observe his surroundings. It seemed like a typical hotel, kind of on the cheap side, but normal. His eyes scanned the chairs in the lobby before landing on a plaque just above it. It was an image of a man he recognized, and it drew him closer. As he approached, he read the words, "Dr. Martin Luther King Jr." The words below it had been slightly smaller, but from the news he had witnessed earlier that year, he knew what it would say. The warning and the looks from the men all made sense now, worry playing on his face. He gave a quick thank you to the lady behind the desk and made his way to the door. Peering out slowly, he couldn't see the men anymore. He only had to make it to his car and he'd be fine. The door opened slowly, Brian's head peeking out in each direction. When the coast seemed clear, he began a brisk walk towards the Dodge. He internally counted his steps, his heart quickening with each higher number. His eyes scanned the area as he moved, and as soon as he laid his hand on the door handle, he gave a slight sigh of relief. His shirt jerked backward, his body following after. He soon found himself staring up into the night sky and feeling a dreadful pain on his back. The group of men hovered over him now, some with expressions of anger, and others seemingly very excited. The largest of the few stood just over Brian's head and leaned down quickly to greet him. "You're on the wrong side of town, boy," before dropping a large ball of saliva onto Brian's forehead. His feet and fists began pummeling his body, his arms rising in defense. He attempted to roll over, but the men didn't relent. He managed to his side and began crawling as best as he could, begging them to stop all the while. The assault slowed and laughter erupted as each one found humor in Brian's attempt to escape. He had only made it a few feet when he felt a heel drive into his backside, shoving him down into the pavement. After a moment of gasping, he started to rise. He felt the burn of the gash that had been left on his cheek, but did not allow that to stop him. The men had been between himself and his car. His only safety would be the motel. He hobbled in the direction of the doors, feeling the warmth of his tears stinging his wounds. They followed and shoved him repeatedly, his body aching from every touch. Then his worst fear came in as a voice of one of his attackers said, "Get the bat." Brian looked over his shoulder to see one of them making a dash for a vehicle. If they returned with any sort of weapon, he knew he would be finished. He couldn't die this far from home with no one or nothing. He couldn't let it all end here. When he finally reached the door, one of them attempted to pull him back. Somewhere within him, his fight response kicked in, and his elbow flew backward towards his assailant's face. It collided with a crack, feeling bone give way to his attack. The man stumbled, grasping at his nose and yelling for help. Brian slung the door open and fell inside. The woman behind the desk screamed, "I don't need this, man, you need to leave." The men didn't enter, but they didn't leave the parking lot either. Brian just knew they would stay there all night if they had to. He couldn't assume the desk clerk would be willing to call the police to assist him, and he couldn't fight them all off. He lay there in the floor trying to find a solution when he noticed the payphone by the door. The idea was horrible, but it's what he had come all this way for anyway. All he needed now was the coin. Pain shot up his shoulder as he rummaged through his pocket, pulling out random change and lint. He had almost made it to the phone before he found the right coin amongst his change. As he lifted the receiver, the woman behind the desk informed him that it wasn't in operation. That fact rang true when there was no dial tone. His forehead rested against the phone, eyes closing as the tears continued to fall. He simply dropped the coin in the slot anyway, and watched as it fell through the return. His body slipped back to the floor, letting the receiver hang beside him. He sat there, eyes closed tight and sobbing to himself. What have I got myself into? He thought. A hand rested on Brian's head, causing his eyes to open wide in that direction. His attire had changed, but it was the man he had been searching for. It was hard to forget, despite the lack of yellowing eyes. He was just the same as his dream. Scratch leaned over to the change return and lifted the shiny round object from it. It turned between his thin fingers, and suddenly the world seemed to come to a halt. Brian examined the room around him for a moment. He couldn't even hear the clock on the wall ticking anymore. It all became still before Scratch looked down at the beaten young man.
Looks like you need some help, Brian.
Rick Sawyer's son followed in his footsteps and bargained with the devil for his life. The deal was sealed with a handshake, and Scratch smirked, gesturing for Brian that it was now safe to leave. He approached the door and noticed the men frozen in place. Scratch snapped his hands closed around the spinning coin, and everything sprang into motion. The blaring horn of a large truck could be heard in the distance, and before the group outside could react, a 2-ton vehicle plowed through them. Their remains piled high along the street in front of the motel as Brian quickly rushed for his car. The woman from the front desk had come out screaming at the sight before rushing back inside to call the police. The engine roared to life with a quick turn of a key. The passenger doors shut as well, seconds before the tires peeled across the pavement. The sirens echoed in the distance as he turned down a side road and headed back to the interstate. Scratch leaned over slightly from the passenger side, his voice detailing the conditions of their deal through a wicked grin. Brian had never pushed the Dodge this hard, his foot buried to the floorboard. The tires came to a screeching halt under the dim light of a truck stop just outside the on-ramp. Brian slammed the car in park, his heart still racing in his chest. He had barely listened to a word his new passenger had said over the last few minutes. He was too focused on fleeing the horror of the hotel. So, let me get this straight, his words coming through gasps. One day, you're gonna come for me and collect on the debt I now owe?
You've got it, kid. I mean, I did save your life after all. Them boys are ready to string you up.
Scratch shot a finger toward him, his smug expression growing. How long do I have? Brian asked, fear showing within his eyes.
Ah, now that's the question, isn't it? I mean, it depends. Usually enough time to live a little. 20 to 30 years, maybe. I mean, I'm not a complete devil.
Scratch laughed at his own pun as he picked up Rick Sawyer's journal. Brian watched as a man flipped through it, scanning over his father's words. He couldn't help but wonder if this is how his father felt after his run-in with Scratch. He wondered how full a life he could possibly live, knowing that it had such an early expiration date. He thought of how secluded his father had been, and suddenly it all made sense. Rick Sawyer had tried to protect his wife and son from the choice he had made. I'm going inside to take a leak. It's a long road back to Cincinnati. Brian's words almost a scowl as he opened his driver's door.
What? The road trip with dear old Dad over already?
Scratch mocked him. Brian leaned over, malice forming on his features. I came for answers. I have them and so much more. I'm ready to go home. Somehow the smile that rested on his passenger's face grew wider.
But you haven't even asked the most important question yet, kid.
Oh yeah? What's that? Brian replied, in the tone of a typical angsty teen. The journal clapped closed as Scratch leaned closer, his words come just above a whisper.
Don't you want to know how to get out of the deal?
Shock transformed Brian's facial expression. He had never once let the idea of being able to break this curse cross his mind. If you could break a deal, then what was the point of making it in the first place? He stood, contemplating this before asking an answer. Scratch gladly informed him that all he needed was to present the coin as a gift to someone else, and the terms of that deal would pass to that person. That is, if they used the coin.
I mean, why else would your dad spend so much time looking for me?
The man said, while leaning back in his seat.
He forgot to ask that question too, and it took him a while to find me again. Poor bastard.
What do you mean? You got what you wanted. You took his soul, Brian barked. Scratch obviously found this completely hilarious. His cackles echoed from the car. He even slapped his knee in a most cartoonish fashion. He wiped at fake tears and tried to compose himself. He even attempted to respond, but seemed to be wrapped in a fit of his own enjoyment.
Silly boy. I didn't take your pops.
Brian almost stumbled at the thought. He was sure he had solved the mystery of the man he never truly knew. The truth came crashing down on him, his hand grasping the door for support. His mind retraced the events leading to his father's death, and nothing made sense. He tried to speak, but his voice got lost within his throat. A million questions clouded his thoughts. When he finally spoke, the words came slow. If not you, then why? Scratch stopped laughing, his face drawing in seriousness.
Well, after your father found me and asked the right questions, he spent the next few years trying to find the right person to give the coin to.
Brian sat back down and listened to a story of how his father had been working a case involving a double homicide. A man named Victor Polora had assaulted and killed 2 young girls, leaving them for dead in an abandoned building. His father had been the lead detective, and though he knew Victor had committed the crimes, their evidence had been tampered with and had been deemed inadmissible in court. The frustration of having such a monster back on the street was more than Rick could stand, and when he took a seat at his desk one night, the idea formed quickly in his head.
So you see.
Scratch removed a small box from his pocket, slipping a cigarette from it and placing it between his lips.
Your dear old dad let Victor have the coin.
He finished speaking before the tip of his smoke was ignited, and the mist lifted into the air around him in a cloud. As Scratch spoke, Brian started remembering the name Victor Polora from his father's files. He had at least a drawer full on that case, so it was hard to forget. His father had become obsessed with that man, and he remembered the long nights Rick would spend in his study trying to crack the case. Now he knew why and what lengths his father would go to in order to seek justice. His thought process was interrupted as he realized that truly did not answer his question. What does that have to do with my dad's death? Scratch smiled while dragging on his cigarette, then releasing the smoke again.
Well, kid, if someone gave you a death sentence, what would you ask the devil to do for you?
Scratch didn't have to say another word. Brian had his answer. It rolled in his head again and again. His legs became weak, his body lowering to a crouching position. His eyes rested toward the ground as he thought of the possibility that his father's attempt at redemption had literally killed him. His despair slowly turned to rage, his body rising from the ground as he shoved an open palm forward. Give me that damn coin. Scratch pulled the shiny object from his jacket pocket, flicking it from the tip of his thumb. It landed perfectly within Brian's waiting hand.
Just like your old man,
he said, as more smoke billowed from his lips. The smoke engulfed the car, far more than he could have exhaled. Brian had to shield his mouth, coughing from the cloud of nicotine. His eyes watered as he drew back the coin and placed it in his pocket. When the mist dissipated, Scratch was gone. A week later, Victor Polora stepped into the lobby of his apartment building. His key turned upon his mail slot and opened slowly. Only a single white envelope sat inside, and he quickly took it in his hands. There was no address, but simply the words, "A gift from Rick Sawyer." His eyes widened and a paranoia filled his body. He found himself looking around the lobby, but he was alone. He tore it open from one end, and as he tilted the correspondence, a small round coin landed between his fingers. He stood in shock, sure that Rick Sawyer was dead. He had even witnessed the funeral. He searched the lobby and yelled out to question who had left the message. He received no response. His eyes turned back to the folded paper, and upon the back he read the words, "If you want to settle this, meet me on the corner of 3rd and Columbia at 10 p.m. Victor stood under the flickering light of a street lamp, his hands tucked in the pockets of his jacket, one of which gripped a pistol. He paced back and forth, occasionally glancing at his watch. When the hand ticked by to identify the proper meeting time, and he had seen no one approach, he grumbled to himself. He cursed out into the night just before he felt the hard metal of a barrel press against the back of his head. A dark laugh rumbled from the man. "You have no idea who you're messing with." "No, you don't know who you've messed with. My name is Brian Sawyer, and you killed my father." The pain and anger reverberated in every word from Brian's mouth. Victor's eyes widened at the sound of the hammer being drawn back behind him. He began to plead for his life, but it fell on deaf ears. Brian had no intention of letting this man get away. He was going to end this ridiculousness once and for all. "You're going to step over to that payphone and drop that coin in the slot. If you run, I shoot you. If you try to fight, I shoot you. If you try anything but what I have instructed, you die." Brian had never sounded so cold in his entire life. He watched as Victor slowly approached the lighted booth, raised the receiver, and dropped the coin into the slot. Within seconds, a car came screeching to a halt beside them. From the passenger side stepped Scratch, and he thanked the driver before approaching the two men. He winked at Brian before stepping over to Victor. He reached down, removed the coin from the return slot where it landed.
"Good to see you again, Victor."
He smiled back to Brian.
"Good going, kid. Looks like you're off the hook."
Victor smiled, assuming he had already figured out a solution to his problem. He asked Scratch to eliminate his new problem just like he had the last, his grin becoming monstrous as his focus fell on Brian. Scratch patted the man in the booth on the back and laughed, which caused Victor to laugh as well, but nervously. The feeling of unease grew more when the sound like a pack of barking dogs echoed in the distance.
"You see, Victor, I only do favors once. If you drop the coin again, then you're just mine."
Scratch's hand rested on his shoulder, gripping tight onto his jacket. Brian stood a few feet away, his hand gripping on the pistol as a silhouette of canines emerged from the shadows. The closer they got, the larger they seemed to be. There had to be at least 6 of them, and each slobbered and snapped at the air around them in their approach. Their eyes glowed an otherworldly red hue, and their bodies were as dark as the shadows that accompanied them. Victor attempted to flee, but Scratch's grip held him in place. The hounds drew in and latched onto the quivering man before dragging him back toward the nothingness they had emerged from. Brian's face should have been of fear, but at this very moment he smiled. He had finally found justice for his father, and the 2 girls Victor had killed. He imagined his father putting his arm around him and thanking him. A single tear trailed his cheek as he finally lowered the pistol. Scratch slowly made his way to Brian, the coin turning between his fingers. When he stopped beside the young man, the coin came to a stop. He reached over and dropped it within Brian's palm. Scratch flashed a grin before speaking.
"Good doing business with you, kid. I will be seeing you around."
The words faded into the wind as he disappeared into a cloud of smoke. The juke joint stank of sweat, cheap whiskey, and old lies. Elijah Cross sat on a splintered stool, guitar across his lap, fingers dancing over the strings. He played like he was drowning, fast, fierce, desperate, but nobody in the room cared. Dice clattered at the corner tables, bottles slammed onto wood. Laughter rose sharp and ugly like knives thrown into the dark. He bent into a solo, dragging a wail from the guitar that should have cracked the damn rafters. One old man near the door flinched, but nobody else even blinked. Maybe it ain't enough, Elijah thought. Maybe it never was. The heat pressed down on him thick and mean. Sweat dripped from his brow, stinging his eyes. The guitar slipped in his hands. He grit his teeth and kept playing. One more song, maybe they noticed this time. Maybe someone important was listening. From the corner of his eye, he caught a flash of red. There, in the darkest booth by the wall, sat a man unlike anyone Elijah had ever seen. Young, maybe late 20s, dressed in a red suit so fine it could have bought the whole damn bar. Black hair slicked back perfect, the skin pale under the low flickering light. And those eyes, icy blue, sharp as broken glass. They locked on Elijah and didn't blink. A chill slid down Elijah's spine, cutting through the heat. His finger stumbled. A sour note slipped out and the crowd jeered. Someone hurled a bottle that shattered against the wall behind him. Elijah cursed his breath, shoved through the last verse and killed the song dead. No applause, no tips. Just more laughter and the scrape of chairs being dragged back for another round of cards. He slung the guitar over his shoulder and stepped off the makeshift stage. His boots scuffed the warped floorboards as he moved through the smoke and noise. He didn't mean to look again, but he did. The man in red was still watching him, smiling now. A slow, patient smile, like he already knew something Elijah didn't. Elijah's feet moved before his brain caught up. One step, then another, pulled toward that corner like a moth toward a bonfire. Maybe it was the drink. Maybe it was the hunger he couldn't kill. Maybe it was just plain old bad luck. But when Elijah reached that table and slid into the seat across from the man in the red suit, he didn't feel fear. He felt hope. A dangerous thing. The man poured 2 drinks from a battered whiskey bottle sitting on the table. No label. The liquid inside caught the light with a dark, almost oily gleam. "Rough night," the man said, sliding a glass toward Elijah. His voice was low, smooth, wrapped in something Elijah couldn't name, like a honey with a blade buried inside. Elijah hesitated. His mama had taught him better than to drink with strangers, especially ones dressed like sin itself. But he picked up the glass anyway. His hand only shook a little. "What's your name?" Elijah asked. The man smiled wider. "You can call me Red." He raised his glass. Elijah clinked his against it. The whiskey burned like fire on the way down, but it was a good burn, strong enough to clear the smoke and bitterness from his chest for a second. "You play real fine," Red said, studying him like a man studies a horse before a sale. "But you're stuck here, playing for pennies and scraps. Ain't right." Elijah snorted. "Ain't about right or wrong, it's just how it is." Red leaned back, stretching long legs under the table. His red jacket caught the light in a way no normal cloth should. "I think you deserve more. You got a spark, I can see it. You just need a little push." Elijah swallowed hard. His heart thudded against his ribs. "You some kind of talent scout?" he asked, half joking, half hoping. Red laughed, low and sharp like a snapped guitar string. Something like that. He leaned forward, voice dropping so low Elijah had to lean in to catch it. I can give you everything you ever wanted. Fame, records, crowds so big they drown out the stars. Your name sung in places you ain't even dreamed of. Elijah's mouth went dry. He thought about Ma working her hands raw in the fields. Thought about every night he played till his fingers bled and still couldn't afford a real pair of boots. He thought about dying in this town, same as every other poor black man who picked up a guitar and dared to dream bigger. What's the price? Elijah asked, voice raw. Red's eyes gleamed brighter, sharp enough to cut glass. Just a small thing. One day when the time's right, I'll come to hear your last song. And when it's done, you'll come with me. Elijah's stomach turned. The whiskey soured on his tongue. But Red was still smiling, still looking at him like he believed in him. Like nobody else in that damn town ever had. You ain't never getting out on your own, Elijah thought. You know it. You always have. He reached out, hand hovering over the table, and Red's hand met his halfway, grip cold and iron strong. It was done. No papers, no blood, just a handshake. Skin on skin, promise on promise. Red slid a black guitar case across the floor with the toe of his gleaming shoe. Elijah picked it up, feeling the weight of it hum through his arms. It was heavier than it should have been, like it was already full of all the songs he hadn't played yet, and maybe some he shouldn't. Play it well, Elijah Cross, Red said, tipping his glass one last time. I'll be listening. The case was heavier than any guitar had a right to be. Elijah carried it down the dirt road, every step sinking a little deeper into the dust. The night buzzed thick with cicadas, and somewhere far off a dog barked at nothing. He didn't dare open it until he was alone. Not on that road. Not with what felt like Red's eyes still burning holes in the back of his skull. He reached his rented room, a sagging shack behind the general store, and dropped onto the bed. The mattress gave a wet sigh under his weight. The case sat on the floor like a black coffin. Elijah wiped his hands on his pants, but they still trembled. He snapped the latches open. Inside, the guitar gleamed. Dark wood, almost black, with a shine like polished stone. Fretboard slick and smooth. Strings so thin they looked like spider silk. But when he plucked one, it thrummed deep enough to rattle his ribs. He lifted it out with shaking hands. It fit against him perfect, like it had been made for him and him alone. For a long moment, he just sat there staring at it. Part of him knew he should be scared, should be praying, running, doing anything but sitting here about to play a devil's gift. But he wasn't scared. He was hungry. Elijah set his fingers on the strings, breathed deep, and played. The first chord hit the air like thunder cracking over water. The window shook. Dust dropped from the rafters. He played again. A riff he'd learned as a boy, simple and fast, but it wasn't simple now. It moved. Each note slid into the next like water over stone, smooth and wild at the same time. The guitar wasn't just an instrument. It was an extension of him. His hands, his heart, his hurt, The sound filled the room, alive and snarling. He played faster, harder, and the guitar answered every push with a power that sent shivers up his arms. This is it, he thought, grinning through the sweat running down his face. This is what I was born for. Outside the cracked window, a few lights flickered on down the road. Neighbors stirred, looking out into the night, trying to figure out where that sound, that wild, beautiful noise was coming from. Elijah didn't care. He played until his fingers bled, and even then, he didn't stop. The next night, Elijah walked back into the same juke joint. Same busted floorboards, same broken down regulars, same stink of sour sweat and spilled beer. But something was different. He was different. The black guitar case swung from his hand like a secret weapon. Nobody looked up when he walked in, not yet. They were busy losing dice games, drowning their misery in brown liquor, same as always. Elijah climbed on to the low stage, sat down slow and opened the case. The room seemed to shiver when he pulled the guitar free. Maybe that was just in his head. He strummed once, low and mean, and the sound rolled across the bar like a wave. A few heads turned, brows furrowed. Conversations stuttered and fell away. Elijah smiled just a little. They hear me now. He let the first song bleed out slow. A blues so deep it felt like wading into dark water. His fingers flew without thinking, every note sharp enough to cut skin. He didn't read the room. He commanded it. Dice hit the table and stayed there. Bottles stopped midair on their way to their mouths. Even the bartenders leaned forward, elbows on the bar, mouth hanging open. Elijah rode the strings like a man possessed. He could feel their hunger now, thick in the air, and could taste it. Every man in that room wanted to be him. Every woman wanted to touch whatever fire was burning in his hands. This, Elijah thought, is what Red promised. He finished the set with a run so fast his own ears barely kept up. When the last note snapped into silence, the room stayed frozen for half a second, and then erupted. Cheers, shouts, stomping feet. Money hit the stage. Crumpled bills, coins, anything they had. A woman whistled so sharp it made him grin. Another one screamed his name. "Elijah Cross! Elijah, play another!" "Come on, boy, you got the devil in you." He laughed, breathless and drunk on it already. And somewhere deep inside, a small voice, quiet but stubborn, whispered, "You didn't earn this. You bought it." But Elijah shoved that voice down into the dark and crushed it under his heel. He grabbed the guitar tight, and he played another song. The days blurred. One night he was packing a juke joint full of tired farmhands, the next he was drawing crowds from 3 towns over. Elijah played everywhere they'd let him. The honky-tonks, street corners, gambling houses where men with guns sat in every shadow. Didn't matter where. Every time he opened the case and touched those silver strings, people listened. And they paid. Good money, too. Not just nickels and dimes. Green bills stuffed into his pockets, handshakes with weight behind them, enough to buy real meals, new clothes, hell, even a new pair of boots that didn't leak when it rained. New boots. Just for him. His name traveled faster than the trains that cut across the Delta. Folks talked about him like a storm, sudden, wild, unforgettable. "That boy Cross, he plays like the devil's whispering in his ear," they said. Most said it with awe. Some said it with fear. Elijah didn't care which, long as they said it loud enough. It was at a rundown club outside Jackson that the next door swung open. The place reeked of piss and cheap gin. Paint peeled off the walls like old sunburn. Elijah had barely finished his first set when a man in a tan suit and city shoes stepped up to the stage. Had a smile too smooth to trust and a card ready before Elijah even said a word. "Walter Riggs, A&R Paramount Records. We need to talk, son. You're sitting on a gold mine, and I got the shovel." Riggs bought him a real dinner. Steak, not stew. Paid for with a roll of cash fat enough to choke on. Talked about train rides north, studio recordings, big crowds that didn't just clap because they were drunk, and crowds that paid top dollar to hear a man like Elijah tear the world apart with 6 strings. It didn't take much convincing. Not when Elijah thought about his mama's hands, cracked and bleeding from the fields. Not when he thought about dying forgotten in a gutter like so many others. Riggs handed him a train ticket. Chicago. A different world. "You keep playing like that," Riggs said, lighting a cigar with a gold lighter, "and you ain't never coming back here." Elijah tucked the ticket into his pocket. He touched the guitar case leaning against the booth, feeling the hum of it even through the leather. He smiled. He was ready. The train screamed north through the night, dragging Elijah across behind it. He sat by the window, guitar case at his feet, watching the fields blur into dark smudges. Every mile between him and the Delta felt like peeling off an old skin. Every mile closer to Chicago felt like stepping into a brand new body. The city hit him with a hammer the moment he stepped off the platform. Noise. Steel and glass clawing at the sky. People rushing in every direction like ants over a burning log. Elijah gripped the guitar tighter and kept moving. This was it. This was what he'd sold his soul for. The studio was nothing like he imagined. Just a gray, battered room above a grocery store. It smelled like damp plaster and tobacco smoke. But when he plugged in, when he wrapped his hands around that black guitar and struck the first note, the walls shook. The sound was bigger here, richer. The engineers stared through the glass like they were seeing something crawl out of the grave and start to sing. He recorded 5 songs that day, every take sharper than the last. By the 3rd track, he wasn't even thinking, just feeling. The music ran through him like lightning looking for a place to burn. Outside the booth, Riggs was practically dancing with excitement. He was already lining up club gigs, radio spots, and bigger stages. "You're gonna set this town on fire, boy," he kept saying, slapping Elijah's back so hard his teeth rattled. Elijah smiled, nodded, and played along. But inside, something twisted tighter every time he touched those strings. Something he couldn't name. The crowds grew faster than the city could hold them. One night he was headlining a sweaty basement club. A week later, he was playing a grand hall with marble columns and chandeliers that cost more than the town he was born in. They screamed his name now, begged for more, threw roses on the stage and sometimes undergarments too. Elijah soaked it in like a starving man at a feast. He played till his fingers split open and bled onto the fretboard. Played till he could barely stand. And every night, after the last encore, he'd sit alone backstage, guitar humming faintly by his side, and feel something hollow gnawing inside him. It was after a show at the Majestic Theater when he saw him again. The crowd was still roaring as Elijah staggered off stage, sweat soaking through his new sharp suit. He ducked into the wings, wiping his face with a towel, and froze. Across the hall, leaning casual against a pillar, was Red. Same red suit, same ice blue eyes, same lazy, knowing smile. He didn't move, didn't call out, just tipped an invisible hat and watched. Elijah's chest tightened. The towel slipped from his fingers. He blinked once, twice, and when he looked again, Red was gone. Only the cold aftertaste of him lingered like a storm gathering at the edge of a clear sky. Elijah stumbled into the dressing room later that night, heart still racing, throat raw from the stage. Outside, the crowd chanted his name, wild and hungry. Inside, he found something else waiting. Women. 2, 3, maybe more. Hanging on the doorframe, smiling wide, batting their lashes. Back home, Elijah would have had to beg for a glance like that. Here they came to him, dripping perfume and promises. He didn't even think. Just reached out, grabbed the nearest hand and pulled her inside. The others followed, laughing, spilling champagne as they kicked the door shut behind them. Clothes hit the floor, hands roamed, mouths pressed against his skin. For a little while, Elijah let it wash over him. The warmth, the noise, the slick bodies tangled with his. No thought, no guilt, just feeling. He wanted to forget the weight in his chest, forget the man in red standing silent in the wings. But even in the middle of it, the moans, the heat, the sweat, he felt it. That hollow place inside him, wide as ever, aching for something he couldn't touch. The next day, Elijah's physical breakdown started. It began with a cough, small at first, easy to ignore. Just the dry scratch of too many nights in smoky bars, he told himself. But it grew deep. Hungry. After one show at the Avalon, he stumbled off stage coughing so hard he doubled over, hacking into his sleeve. When he pulled his hand away, he saw the blood, a dark red stain blooming against the white linen. For a moment he just stared at it. The crowds roared in behind thick walls. The guitar in his case thumped faintly at his feet like it was laughing. Riggs clapped him on the back a minute later, all smiles and promises. "Another show next week, kid. You're hotter than a July bonfire. Gotta ride the wave while it's breaking." Elijah wiped the blood away and forced a grin. "Yeah, another show." But then came the hands. He woke up one morning and couldn't uncurl his fingers. They locked up stiff as wood, twisted into claws. It took him nearly an hour under scalding water just to get them moving again. That night on stage, he missed a note. First time in months. It rang out ugly and sharp across the packed theater. People barely noticed. They were too busy screaming for more. But Elijah noticed. And Elijah's chest felt hollow as a broken drum. But he grit his teeth and kept playing. The nightmares clawed at him too. Every time he shut his eyes, he was back in that juke joint, staring across the smoky room, staring at Red at the table. Red waiting. Red always waiting. Sometimes in the dreams, the guitar strings wrapped around his wrists like chains. Sometimes they slithered up his throat, choking the breath from him. He'd wake gasping, drenched in sweat, fingers flexing for a guitar that wasn't there. But Elijah refused to stop. Fame was a fire now, burning so bright it left no room for second thoughts. Play while you can, he told himself. Play until the last note. And every night, as he dragged his battered body on stage and poured everything he had left into those silver strings, he felt that hollow space inside him growing larger, the hungrier, waiting for the moment when it would finally swallow him whole. The years and years blurred by, but the hunger stayed sharp. 10 years, maybe 15, maybe longer. Elijah Cross rode the wave longer than anyone expected, longer than he should have. From dusty juke joints to grand theaters draped in velvet and gold, from scratchy radio signals crackling through the backwoods to billboard posters plastered across Chicago, New York, and even Paris. His music didn't just fill rooms, It bled into the culture, changed it. You could hear his licks in the way the next generation picked up their guitars. See his swagger copied by men who never knew what it meant to claw your way up from nothing. Elijah lived fast and played harder and became a legend before he was even old. The money poured in, the houses with marble floors, and cars with leather seats that smelled like the future. Women chased him like dogs after meat. Men shook his hand like touching him would rub off some magic. He just wished he could have shared it with his mother. She had passed long before he ever met Red. And the music never stopped, no matter how hard his body begged. The sickness of his came in waves. Some years were better than others. There'd be seasons where the cough faded, where his fingers loosened up, where he almost forgot about the blood in the dreams. He'd think maybe, just maybe, he'd outrun the devil after all, that he could stay up here in the high places forever. But it always came back, and always worse. Nights where he hacked blood onto silk pillowcases, nights where his hands cramped so bad he had to soak them in ice buckets before a show just to get through the first set. Nights where the nightmares dragged him screaming out of sleep, clawing at his throat. Through it all, Elijah smiled for the cameras, played like he was carving something raw out of his own bones, and toured endlessly. Europe, South America, back to the States again, leaving crowds wrecked in his wake. Every town, every stage, every time he played, a little more of him slipped away. Some said Elijah Cross had the devil's luck. Others said he was the devil's warning. He didn't correct either. He was too busy running on borrowed time, running from the man in the red suit who he sometimes still glimpsed in the corners of smoky halls or reflected in the glass of a dressing room mirror. Never speaking, never rushing, just waiting. The call came on a rainy morning. His manager spoke with that fake accent Elijah had heard 1,000 times, a little too upbeat, like the man on the other end of the line knew Elijah might not make it another year. "They're throwing a concert," the man said. "Whole industry's behind it. 20 years since your first record dropped. Big theater in New York, press will be there. Fans flying in from overseas. It's your night, Eli." Elijah listened with the phone cradled against his shoulder, a hand curled around a black coffee gone cold. His fingers trembled, not from fear, just because they always did now. He gave a soft grunt. "Yeah, all right." He spent the next few weeks in a kind of fog, not sad, not nervous, just still. Like his bones were waiting for something the rest of him hadn't caught up to yet. He looked in the mirror one morning and didn't recognize the man staring back. Hair gone silver at the edges, lines carved deep into his skin like riverbeds. The fire in his eyes, still there but faint. He opened the guitar case. The black wood had dulled with time, but the strings gleamed like they were brand new. They always did. He plucked one. It hummed through his chest like a heartbeat. He winced. His fingers cracked open along the ridges. Blood swelled slow and dark. Elijah wrapped the cloth around the wound and closed the case. He knew what was coming. He'd always known. The night before the concert, he couldn't sleep. The hotel room was too quiet, too clean, and too far from the dirt and sweat and sound that had made him. He sat in a chair by the window, watching the city move below him. Yellow cabs, steam rising from the grates, life going on. He nodded off around dawn, and in that sleep, the devil came to him. They sat at a table just like the first one. Sticky wood, smoke curling through the air. Same red suit, Same blue eyes. Same easy smile. You held on longer than most, Red said, lighting a cigarette with a snap of his fingers. Didn't think you'd make it this far. Elijah didn't answer. He didn't need to. You left a mark. Songs they'll sing long after your dust. Men trying to sound like you, women chasing ghosts. He blew smoke across the table. You got what you paid for. Elijah looked down at his hands in the dream. Scarred, cracked, and shaken. But still there. Still his. Then he looked up. I don't have much time left. Red smiled wide. I know. Elijah woke up with the sun bleeding through the curtains and the weight of finality pressing down on his chest. He washed, dressed slowly, tuned the guitar to what just may be his last time. He didn't bring anyone with him, just the music. The theater was already full before the lights dimmed, an opulent hall of velvet seats, brass railings, and a stage framed in deep red curtains. People had flown in from across the country, across oceans even, all to witness a man whose music had outlived trends, who had etched himself into the bones of American sound. And there were bluesmen with creased faces who remembered sharing cigarette butts with him behind shotgun shacks. There were young artists raised on his records, clutching programs like scripture. And there were journalists, photographers, industry leeches, all of them buzzing like flies around a legend still drawing breath. The crowd quieted not with a command, but with a reverence that rose naturally the moment Elijah Cross stepped onto the stage. He looked older than they remembered, leaner, slower in his stride, but still he carried the same presence. That gravity that pulled attention to whether he spoke or not. He wore a plain black suit, clean but not flashy, and moved with a careful weight that spoke of pain managed, not overcome. In his hand was the same guitar case, the same one from the beginning. He sat on a worn wooden stool beneath a single white spotlight. No backup band, no backing tracks. Just him and that old guitar that still gleamed like it drank light and gave nothing back. When he opened the case, the audience leaned in, not because they expected some theatrical flourish, but because even after all these years, the moment Elijah laid his fingers on those strings felt like a kind of ceremony. He looked out across a sea of faces, searching not for anyone in particular, and yet finding someone all the same. Front row, center seat, Red. Dressed to kill, as always, crimson suit, hair slicked back like polished onyx, eyes so blue they could cut through smoke. He sat with one leg crossed over the other, hands folded neatly in his lap, his expression unreadable, and completely still. Elijah didn't blink. He didn't smirk. He didn't nod. He simply turned back to the mic, adjusted it slightly, and began to play. The first song was soft, almost tender, a slow blues riff that opened like a sigh. No lyrics, just melody. Just fingers gliding over strings like they remembered every wrong note he'd ever played, and chose now to forgive them. The second was a song people knew, and they responded with quiet murmurs of recognition. But Elijah didn't play it the way it was recorded. This version was stripped down, weathered by time and weight. It was less performance and more confession. As the set went on, the songs dug deeper. He wasn't performing anymore. He was releasing. Decades of joy, pain, fury, and compromise spilled into the chords. There were verses he'd never sung before, notes he held longer than he should have, And behind every one of them was a man who knew what it cost to carry this long a flame. By the fourth song, his voice began to falter. Not in pitch. Elijah Cross never lost pitch, but in breath. His chest heaved between lines, and there was a tremor in his fingers he couldn't quite hide anymore. Still, he kept going. He didn't look at Red. He didn't have to. He could feel him there, just as he had felt him for the last 20 years at every show behind every dream, stitched into the silence between every note. When he reached the final song, Elijah rested his hands on the guitar for a moment, collecting whatever strength remained. He looked out over the crowd again, not with pride or fear, but with something quieter. Acceptance. He began to play and the room held its breath. The final song didn't sound like the others. It was heavier, darker, laced with something primal and raw. The melody bent and wavered like a candle in wind, refusing to burn out no matter how hard the air around it pulled. Elijah's voice cracked on the third verse, and this time it didn't recover. But he kept going, pushing the sound out of himself like it didn't want to leave. Blood appeared on his fingertips where the strings bit into flesh, but he didn't slow down. Every stroke of the guitar was a farewell, every lyric a tolling bell. And then it came. The last note. He held it, let it ring out into the dark like a prayer tossed into a storm. It echoed off the walls, lingered in the air, and then finally died. Elijah lowered his hands, let them fall to his sides. The guitar remained on his lap, silent now. He exhaled once, soft and final. Then he slumped forward, eyes closed. His body didn't shake. It didn't convulse or spasm. It simply stopped. The crowd didn't react right away. They thought it was part of the act. A dramatic finish, maybe a bow coming next. But after a long moment, when he didn't move, a stagehand emerged from the wings. Then two more. When they touched him, the truth unraveled. The audience rose to its feet, not with applause, but with stunned silence. A few gasps, a few cries. The headlines would read the next morning, Elijah Cross is dead. Died doing what he loved. Final note. Final breath. But no one would mention the man in the red suit who stood up from the front row, who straightened his cuffs, casually strode upon the stage, placed one hand on Elijah's body, and simply plucked the tired soul out, and took it with him as he left the stage and walked calmly down the aisle. No one noticed how he stepped behind the curtain without a word, or how when he did, Elijah's guitar case vanished along with him. No one heard the door shut behind them. No one saw the soul leave with the sound. Years passed, then decades. The headlines faded, the stages changed, and new voices rose to chase the same glory Elijah Cross once held in his weathered hands. But his name never disappeared, not completely. They taught his music in college classrooms and wrote essays about how he changed the shape of blues, bending it into something bleeding and brutal and beautiful. The film directors used his songs to score tragedy. His records became relics, passed down like scripture. His face was printed on posters, bootleg t-shirts, and murals appealing in back alleys. And still, no one really knew where he came from. Not exactly. Not all the way. Some said he was born with a guitar in his hands. Others claimed he was a ghost even before he died. The story that stuck, though, the one whispered late at night by musicians and drunks and old men with too many regrets, was always the same. He sold his soul for a sound no man should have been able to play. And when his time came, he played his last note and the devil took him back. Most people laughed it off, but not everyone. In a little roadside bar on the outskirts of Nashville, nothing fancy, just neon beer signs and a broken jukebox, an open mic night dragged on past midnight. Most of the crowd was gone, but a few diehards lingered, nursing beers and waiting to be impressed. The kid who stepped on stage couldn't have been more than 19. Skinny, nervous, dressed in a thrift store jacket and scuffed boots. He clutched an old guitar like it was the last thing tethering him to the earth. He played slow at first, rough, unsure, but there was something in it. A spark just beginning to catch. A truth trying to claw its way out. By the second verse, the bar went quiet. At the far end of the room, in a booth swallowed by shadow, a man in a red suit lit a cigarette and watched with interest. He didn't clap. He didn't drink. He just listened, blue eyes gleaming under the brim of a perfectly pressed hat. When the song ended, the kid looked around the room, confused by the silence. Then he saw the man in the red suit stand, smooth and slow, and begin to walk his way. Their eyes met. The kid didn't look away. He didn't know why, but he suddenly felt very cold and very awake. I was born an embarrassment, according to my mother. Whenever she wouldn't yell at me, chastise me, or starve me, she would beat me with belt buckles until their leather binds were frayed and worthless. According to her, I was supposed to be exactly like her, and it was all my fault if I wasn't up to par. My mother was beautiful, slender, and was a rich, famous model. And me, on the other hand, I lost the genetic lottery. I would always gain massive amounts of weight for no reason. Nothing could control my endless weight gain. I tried keto dieting, fasting, exercising until my muscles were going to explode, everything including the kitchen sink. Escaping wasn't going to work. All of the staff were too scared of her to disobey and ensured I would stay permanently according to her wishes. The last thing all of us wanted to do was piss her off. Fighting back wasn't going to work either. Whenever I called the police, they would just dismiss my claims, leading to more abuse. I just wanted it all to stop. The only way I could stop this was to please her. But I couldn't. I had forgotten how many days passed since my mom last fed me. Even when she would provide me with meals, they were portioned so small they couldn't even feed an ant. I had walked home from high school last Tuesday, where my mother was waiting right at the door. Her arms were folded and she was giving me a death glare that burned right through me. She handed me a jar of vomit-inducing syrup. "Drink," my mother demanded, shutting the door behind me. I took the opaque jar from her hand, letting its cool surface touch my lips. Its taste frazzled and bit at my tongue. Coating it in a film of pain, I spit it back in. "I can't," I said meekly. She rose her hand and struck me in the face. "I'm your mother. Do as you're told and drink now." My stomach quaked and roared. All I had to eat that day was cafeteria food so appalling that prisoners wouldn't even give it a sniff. But I had to keep sustenance in me. I couldn't possibly last much longer if I didn't eat. "Drink!" she screamed. Seeing I had no other options, I started to chug the bottle. I gagged, wanting to spit out the concoction as bad as I wanted to breathe. My hand slipped on the edge of the bottle suddenly. It fell to the floor with a crack, spilling out the contents. I pressed my back against the door, covering my head with my arms and bracing myself for what was going to come. "You did that on purpose, didn't you?" my mother roared. In the heat of the moment, I couldn't find any words to say and defend myself. "Mom, no, it was in..." She grabbed me by my hair, throwing me to the floor like a sandbag. Before I could get up, she stomped on me and kicked at my ribs. I crouched to the ground, arms around my chest, begging her to stop. Her stiletto dug into my back, not unlike an archaeologist's pickaxe around a dinosaur bone. "Look at me!" She yanked up my snot and tear-covered face, spraying saliva as she snarled. "I gave birth to you. Who fed you and took care of you every day ever since you were born? Me. And now you're going to pay me back. You are not going to be an embarrassment to my career. I worked my fingers to the bone and I expect you to obey. Do you understand? Yes, just stop, please." She slammed me down when she had enough of me. "And wipe the gunk off of your face." I ran upstairs and shut the bathroom door in a rage. My hands turned red while I clenched the porcelain sink. The blood and heat from my body congealed into my face. Cold water cleansed my skin and made it turn back into its natural shade of apricot. Rolls of fat jostled around, their sound resembling taunting. I bit my lip until blood was drawn. Worthless piece of shit. I choked on my tears. I would not deal with this mistreatment. Fighting her was a no-go, as I said before, and she was thousands of times stronger than me, it seemed. And taking on her would be like a baby trying to take on Bruce Lee. If I didn't lose weight, this torture would only continue. What was I going to do? I ran into my room, shutting the door. Cracking my cheap laptop open, my mom refused to give me anything useful unless I behaved. I scrambled through the web pages, tears clouding my vision. Every time I moved on to the next link, it would remain stuck for several minutes. I shouldn't have been surprised. My laptop was slower than a tortoise on ketamine. Each refresh would only bring up countless clicked web links. So many failed attempts at trying to lose weight. I pounded a fist against the bedsheet. Hours passed. There was no solution in sight. After time flew by like an arrow, I finally found an unclicked link. A black website pulled up with the words, "Looking to lose weight? Try spirit therapy." There was still hope I could please my mother. My tears dried. A laugh bubbled up in me, but I shut my trap before I could alert anyone. In red, there was a list of instructions. Step 1. Draw blood from your index finger. My mom wouldn't allow me to keep any knives in case I ever got any ideas, so I took out a nail clipper, pressed the jaws against the swirl on my index finger, bit down on my pillow, and snipped off a chunk of skin. The metallic liquid covered the print in crimson. Step 2. Rub the blood against your hands and keep them together in a prayer. I smeared the wound across the palms of my hands. The liquid started to coagulate and turn into an almost gluey substance. I put them in prayer, clicking my tongue in satisfaction. Step 3. Keeping your hands together, say the following words. Like the moon will eternally wax and wane, I have been forced to live a life in unheeding pain. Spirits from beyond the crimson veil, whose mission it is to help those who fail, I summon you all and ask for a hand. End my suffering at once, as that is my command. After saying those words, I closed my eyes and let the magic do its work. When I reopened them, nothing had happened. I broke down in tears once again. My nightmare was going to continue. Pound, 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 pounding at the door. Get going, Nora! Meet me in the bathroom so I can fix you up. I have a photo shoot in a private park at 7. It was my mother. Coming. I wiped the tears away and rolled my eyes at the door. If I was caught crying in front of all those people, I was guaranteed a punishment. I got up, a blur shooting past the outside of my window. It left a motion trail where it had passed. I rubbed the tears out of my eyes. The flash was gone. The only thing that could match the blur's color was the sunset. Twilight shined through the autumn forest. A snow-white drape covered the golden leaves. Dozens of magazine photographers stood around her in a semicircle. I wore a slender ruby dress covered in glittering sequins, while my mother wore a dress that was a beautiful gold skirt with a dandelion yellow corset and sashes to match. Flashes of cameras blinded me. With each flash, she would strike pose after pose. "This is how you're supposed to model, Nora. Watch and learn," she said, smiling at me and waving to the photographers. It took everything I had for me not to punch her in the teeth. I walked away, hoping to release some steam. There was no way I was going to be anywhere near that two-faced whore any longer. I took off my high heels and let my feet flatten against the ground. Rustle, rustle, rustle. Between the chatter far away, the leaves started to crunch while I was standing still. I turned back to the crowd, hoping my mother wasn't looking for me. I ran off until the crowd wasn't visible. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I did a double take at the canopies. The sun was on the fringe of the horizon, and darkness was starting to surround the park. From the corner of my eye, a clump of bones, muscle, and hair landed with a wet thud against the ground. Its crimson form crumpled to the dry earth like an oversized raindrop. Then came another falling from the sky. Then another and another, until half a dozen shriveled and bony figures peered at me. Their sockets were empty, with nerves hanging while their eyelids were permanently stitched open. All their mouths were covered in sores. Ribs poked out from their chests that cracked and rattled, similar to the bars on a broken xylophone as I paced forward. My muscles locked in place. I turned to the photographers. Making a blind move, I sprinted towards them. I didn't care about what my mother would do to me for my ignorance. The only thing I wanted was safety. Somebody help! Stone-cold fingers clamped my jaw shut, and hands ripped apart my dress, pressing my back against the dead grass. Like a pack of wolves bringing down an elk, they climbed all over me, covering my mouth to prevent me from crying out. Once they had immobilized me, their lipless mouths opened into a white void. The sound of deep inhaling whistled through my bones, passing through my cells not unlike a river passing through rapids. My breath was eaten away, slowly being erased from this world. They opened their mouths further and further, trying to absorb everything from the atmosphere. Their jangly heads creaked with each inch closer they drew. I closed my eyes, hoping it would all be over. To my surprise, the figures had left. By the time I spun around to investigate, they already took off into the night. My arms and legs were covered in thin purple bruises where those bastards had pinned me. Activity from the photographers had vanished, and the rest of the camera crew too. "Nora!" my mother exclaimed, observing those that might be watching. Covering my middle finger with my other hand, I frowned. She immediately braced me into a hug. I wasn't going to accept anything from her. It was just another lie. She then hissed into my ear. "You will deal with your actions when we get home, Missy." My mother looked around once more. "I'm so glad you're safe." I silently groaned. She ran her fingers across my waist, taken aback suddenly. Her mouth was agape. "Nora, my God, look at your body. You're beautiful." My eyes turned down at my form. The rolls of fat were flattened. I felt my face. The contours were in tune and no longer flabby. My limbs were slender as twigs. I began to giggle at my new form. The treatment worked. After every second, that laugh grew heartier and louder. Come on, sweetie, let me get you some soup when we get home. I gave her a nervous smile, trying to scout out for any strings she might have attached to her proposal. Even if she did live up to her promise, what was I supposed to do? Was it going to be a trick? 5 days later. For once in my life, my abuse was going to end. Or so I thought. My mother proceeded to smack me with a ruler. You're a slut, she barked. All you ever do is stand in my way. Why don't you ever obey the simplest orders? After countless hours of abuse, she sent me up to my room for bed. I didn't understand. For once, I was able to give her what she wanted after years of being unable to please her. Yet now the abuse remained. What was I going to do now? As I retreated to my quarters, I tucked myself in and closed my eyes. My pillow turned wet from my tears. The lights were shut off automatically some hours later. I could occasionally hear the footsteps of the passing guards, but drifted off without minding them. I heard my floorboards creak. I awoke, jutting up from the covers to investigate the noise. The window was ajar. Didn't I lock it before I went to bed? I said to myself. I quickly closed it and gazed outside. Lights from the lamp posts illuminated the streets. Outside, yapping coyotes or stray cats, but other than that, the night was still. I blinked, lazily shutting the window and shades before crawling back in bed. My eyes were closed not for 15 seconds when a depression developed on my bed. Arising once again, I woke up, only to see the 6 rusty figures from 5 days ago at the park. Their mouths open and slobbering. One of them was already nose to nose with me. Their cold fingers wrapped around me as they all forced my mouth shut once again and opened their mouths to deeply inhale the air. As a shroud of gray mist entered their mouths, I passed out. My fingers rested in between a ribcage of some sort when I woke up. Were those bastards back for more? I yanked off the covers, hyperventilating. No, it couldn't be, I whispered. My skin was shrink-wrapped against my frail frame. I touched my head, feeling the notches on my skull. My hair was left in clumps, my scalp resembling a worn-out porcelain doll. I ran over to the wall mirror, screaming in horror. My beautiful form was gone. All the muscle in my body had vanished, leaving me with nothing but a starved skeleton. I sliced off some skin with the nail clipper, putting the blood on a glucose monitor. My sugar levels were normal. Those creatures were responsible for leaving me like this. Doctors wouldn't be able to solve my condition. I had to talk to a professional that knew about the demons that stalked me. I typed in the location of a nearest psychic, clambering out the window and sneaking away from the cameras towards the city. In times like those, I wished I were allowed to drive. When I was a far enough distance away, I paused. Should I try and call the police? I decided to not even bother. My mother would just fabricate another lie to get them to buzz off, and I would just be abused again. The fact that the staff at the house were on my mother's side didn't help. Besides, it wouldn't help my situation with these demons. I was certain that if I didn't get everything figured out, these specters would kill me. Before I continued further, I scanned my surroundings in case they would show up. When they didn't, I continued my search. I came up to the door and brushed aside the bead screen entrance, leading to a gold leaf-coated room filled with exotic fabrics, cushions, and black curtains. Surrounded by an igloo of pillows was an old woman in a hood with the symbols of the Greek zodiac tattooed on her face. What brings you here? The psychic inhaled a puff of smoke from her pipe and blew a ring at me. I waved it away. You know about the supernatural, right? I've been stalked by these, scraggly crimson things. Please, help. I'm beginning to waste away. I turned towards the bead screen. If I stared outside long enough, I could see their crimson shapes lurking outside and waiting to strike. Are you gonna read my palm or look at a crystal ball or stuff like that? The woman just stared at me. Very funny. Take a deep breath. I did as I was told. A smooth rectangle formed from her smoke, bending around my face. Ink from her zodiac symbols dripped off and tapped my forehead. Then the smoke cleared. Why the hell would you summon demons like that? Everyone knows demons hate humans. That better be a good explanation, she said, leaning in and taking off her hood. Long silver hair draped from her scalp. She was shocked, but her narrow eyes indicated that she wanted to hear more of my story. You see, I was trying to lose weight, but I couldn't, and I couldn't figure out any reason why. I had to do what I could. It worked for a while, but now it ended up like... Say no more. I have an explanation. You actually don't have any physical conditions that led you to gaining this much weight. I rested my heart on my chest. Good to know. It's spiritual. You see, humans sometimes have souls that are too big and have to shed away the excess material. And sometimes it comes up as nosebleeds, extra dandruff, and in your case, fat. The demons help stabilize your condition so you won't have to worry about weight again. The bad news is, those demons you summoned are not trying to help you. Then, what were they trying to do? The seer gave me a cold stare. Look for a meal. They feed off of human souls. Sounds like you were tricked by the website owner. She even knew I went to the website. This lady was good. I gasped. Is there any way that I can stop them? I wouldn't say stop them, more like repel them. You must consume human flesh to ward them off. My jaw dropped to my feet. I beg your pardon? You have to consume just one bite in order to keep them away. Keep at it until the beasts leave you alone. You either drink someone's blood or eat any part of the body. They can also be dead or alive. I wasn't about to turn into a cannibal. Vomit rose up from my stomach, stinging the back of my throat. Well, there has to be other ways I can ward off those things. Please tell me there's another way. She shook her head. I don't know what else to tell you. I stared at my frail form, my eyes beginning to water. There were no other options. I clenched a fist. I paid the fee for the psychic and headed home, realizing it was getting late. That night, I went to the city's graveyard. Pausing for a moment to catch my breath, I paced towards the nearest gravestone. In the distance, I could see the crimson forms plopping to the ground. The demons were back. Adrenaline made me dig up the hole faster than I thought possible. I turned around as 3 more dropped to the forest ground and ran through the foggy night. Come on, I said. Dirt flew away from the hole, leaving a pile right beside it. I began to sweat as the last 2 fell to the ground like ripe fruit and sprinted towards me like quarterbacks in the Super Bowl about to score a touchdown. Clunk. My shovel hit the hard, polished maple coffin. I pried it open, revealing a bloated corpse that reeked of decay. Maggots ate at his insides. I puked by the side. The monster sprinted even closer, around 50 feet away. Closing my eyes, I thrust my hand into his body and yanked out the dead man's liver. They weren't even 10 feet away when I bit into the bitter, juicy slab of meat. Purple vortices surrounded the beast as they were violently dragged back to the netherworld from where they came. I started sobbing. I covered up the hole I made, taking the liver with me and hiding it in a plastic bag, and headed home. It was obvious I was going to need to consume more flesh, and I didn't have the heart to perform that disgusting operation again. I don't know exactly if there is an afterlife, but I hope the dead man can forgive me from the heavens. I pulled out my phone. It was emergency services. I hesitated for a second, until I developed the courage to pick it back up. To my luck, I found out that my mother had gotten into a horrible car accident while trying to chase after me, and ended up a quadriplegic. And just like that, her life and reputation shattered in seconds. Days later, I was able to take all the camera evidence and finally turn it into the police. Now that my mother was finally bedridden, she was powerless. Those staff that once feared her now started to stand up to her. Not long after, she was sentenced to prison for her atrocities and would remain in the jail hospital in intensive care for a long time. I started having much more freedom than before. I never felt like I deserved it, though. For days after that accident, I felt like my mom would pop out of the corner, giving me another lashing. But after dealing with her verbal abuse for so long, I began to get used to it, knowing that she, for once, wouldn't be able to do a damn thing. As time went on, I began to run out of the dead man's liver. I needed a quick supply of human flesh, stat. Despite being harmed by someone for so long, I wouldn't dare hurt an innocent human. The only reason why I ate that liver was because I needed to ensure that those demons didn't consume the rest of my soul while it was still healing. Then I got an idea today. I walked into my mother's room, where she laid on her white sheet bed with several other beaten prisoners. One of the prisoners I saw there, well, I tipped them and they gave me a shiv, which I hid behind my back. "Is it time to feast yet, darling? I asked you to bring me a meal today since you were visiting," my mom said, smiling and trying to perform an innocent act. "Don't call me that." I returned a smile and took the shiv. My brow furrowed. I let out a chuckle, seeing her terrified expression. I gripped her side, pinching off some of her skin on her side and covering my hand, holding the knife in my right. "What are you doing, Nora? Stop it!" she ordered. I put a finger on her mouth. Aligning the knife with her skin, I stared at her sinisterly. For those who are wondering why I don't regret using demons to help me lose weight, you're about to find out. "You're damn right, Mother. It is time to feast," I smiled, as I sawed off part of her skin and abdomen muscle and devoured it. I am the deal maker. I don't expect you to understand what that means. Not truly. It isn't just a name. It's a shape I've taken. A role I've worn so long it fused to the bone. You may imagine something grand or something grotesque, but the truth is simpler than that. I make deals. That's it. That's all. That's enough. You want something, I give it to you. Simple, elegant, no complicated forms, no hidden runes, no babbling goblins or cursed rings. Just you, me, and the weight of your own want. You tell me the thing you've never told another soul, the real thing, and I say, very well. Of course, how you get it, that part's rarely what people picture, and that's where the fun begins. You see, people aren't endlessly creative in the ways they ruin themselves. They want love and they ask for worship. They want safety and demand power. They want peace, but they ask for more. Always more. The problem with humans is that they think they know what they want. They think naming the wish is the same as understanding it. It's adorable. Like a child asking to eat candy for every meal, and then being surprised when they vomit on the carpet. Lately, I've noticed a new trend, a particularly modern flavor of desperation. It's not about riches anymore, not really. Fame. Now that's the drug of choice. But not even fame in the old sense. Not talent recognized, not greatness earned. No. What they want now is visibility. Eyes on them, always and forever. Immortality has become social. They want to be known, not just while they live, but after. They want their name carved into the collective brain of the world. They want history to bend around them. Even if they don't have anything to say, they want it screamed into the void anyway. And that brings us, yes, to the curious case of Eli Morgan. Now, Eli was like many before him, young, ambitious, and painfully sincere. A little lost, a little loud about it. 25, still clinging to the idea that his life had meaning just waiting to be unlocked like some grand achievement badge. He wanted to leave a mark, something permanent, eternal. He didn't want to be special for a moment. He wanted it to be etched in stone. The kind of remembered that outlives empires, that gets statues and think pieces and conspiracy theories. And the poor boy thought I would be the one to stop him. No. I gave him exactly what he asked for. After all, I always do. Shall we begin? It happened on a cold Tuesday night. I was sitting in the back booth of a shuttered jazz bar in New Orleans. No music anymore, just the memory of it soaked into the wood. I like places like that. Echo chambers of better times. I was sipping something that looked like whiskey, but wasn't, listening to a rat try to chew through an old speaker cable when I felt it. The call. You never forget the feeling, like being yanked through a hook threaded through your ribs. Subtle at first, then undeniable. It pulls you through shadow, through places light doesn't know exist. That delicious little tremor in the fabric of things, signaling that someone out there, someone alive and desperate, has just whispered the right words with just the right mix of fear and faith. And just like that, I had an appointment. I stepped through the dark between places and arrived in a dim, cramped apartment. One of those cookie-cutter city boxes that always smells like damp drywall and microwave noodles. Cheap blinds, a flickering light bulb, tension in the air thick enough to slice. Eli Morgan was sitting cross-legged on the floor. Salt circle, black candles, his laptop open next to him, the page still up. How to summon the deal maker? A post left on the internet from a previous client of mine. I thought about taking it down myself, but it provided great word of mouth. He looked up at me when I stepped through the shadow. He stared and I smiled. Always the same reaction. Part horror, part disbelief, part relief. They're never sure if it worked until I speak. "You rang?" I said, brushing imaginary dust off of my coat. He scrambled to his feet, eyes wide, breath caught. Are you him?" "I hope so, otherwise this just got awkward." He didn't laugh. Shame. I do love a good laugh. "You're the deal maker," he said, like he was testing the words, tasting them. "You're real." "As real as anything you've ever regretted." There was a long silence. He swallowed twice. I waited. No need to rush this part. The ask always comes. I want... He started, then stopped. "Take your time. It's important to say it right." He nodded and collected himself, looked me straight in the eye, That part always impresses me a little. So rare these days. I want to be remembered forever. I want the world to never forget who I am. I tilted my head. Forever's a long time, Mr. Morgan. He didn't flinch. I know. You don't want fame for a year, a decade, a trend cycle or two. No, I want to be etched into culture, into memory, into history. I want kids to learn my name in school. I want documentaries, statues, podcasts dissecting everything I ever said. Romantic. Naive, but romantic. He stood his ground, so I stepped closer. One last chance to change your mind. You may get exactly what you asked for. I won't change it. This is what I want. Very well. When you wake up tomorrow, the world will know your name. His eyes lit up. The smallest, stupidest smile crossed his face. And then I turned to go. Wait, that's it? I glanced back. Should there be more? No, I just thought... Don't you take something in return? Oh, Mr. Morgan, I already have. And before he could ask what, the shadow took me. Ah, the early days of fame, always the sweetest. Like the first few bites of a rich dessert before it turns your stomach. Eli Morgan woke up like a king. His phone was a war zone of notifications. Emails, texts, missed calls, mentions, tags, articles. A viral post dissecting a poem he'd written 3 years prior had exploded overnight. From there, the algorithm gods took over. One thing led to another, and suddenly he was everywhere. The critics called him visionary. And it wasn't just a poetry of his, but it was music of his he'd written as well. They called him brilliant, authentic, words humans use when they don't quite understand something but are afraid to admit it. His face was on magazine covers. Clips of his interviews spread like wildfire. Podcasts quoted him. And teenagers argued over his meaning in the comments sections. He didn't just trend. He stuck. Within a month, he'd gone from relative obscurity to a cultural lodestone. The kind of person whose words are carved into the internet like commandments. The type whose face appears in murals and protest signs, on the t-shirts of the ironic and the faithful alike. And oh, he handled it well. At first, he gave humble interviews, refused to take cheap shots, donated to causes, held eye contact, thanked his team. He meant it too. That was the most tragic part. He truly believed he could do it better. Be the one who stayed grounded, the good kind of famous. I must admit, I was impressed. He wasn't perfect, but he was smart. Sharp, aware of the traps, and for a while he danced around them with grace. No scandals, no outbursts, no collapse. For years he rode that wave like he was born to do it. And I watched. From shadows backstage, from reflections in sunglasses, from the corners of green rooms and the backs of stadium crowds. I watched him climb. I watched him glow. Oh, how immortality has become endlessly boring for me. I must keep myself entertained somehow, shan't I? He never looked for me, not once. Most don't. They're too busy basking in the warmth of what they think is the sun. But I was there. Once I make a deal, I'm always there. I remember thinking maybe this one will surprise me. Maybe Eli Morgan will actually beat the house. Poor boy. The house never loses. 10 years went by. I let him bask in it for 10 whole years. We were on a rooftop suite overlooking Los Angeles. One of those places that costs more per night than most people make in a year. Glass walls, infinity pool, twinkling skyline. A monument to someone who thinks they've won. Eli was alone, barefoot, sipping something amber and overpriced. He leaned on the railing like he was posing for a portrait, chin up, wind in his hair. His face was a little sharper than before, his eyes a little harder. Fame does that. I stepped out of the shadow behind him and cleared my throat softly. He didn't flinch. That annoyed me a little. "Took you long enough," he said, not turning around. I raised an eyebrow. Were you expecting me?" He smirked. "No, but I'd figured you'd show up eventually. 10 years of living like a god, you had to be watching." I stepped beside him and looked out at the city. "You've done well." "I know." He sipped his drink. "You know what the funny part is? I thought I'd regret it." "The deal?" "Thought I'd wake up screaming or bleeding from the eyes. I thought there'd be strings, hidden costs, monkey paw bullshit. And yet..." He turned to face me now, and there it was. That gleam in his eye. The one fame polishes into people like him. Yet it's been perfect. I'm not just famous, I matter. My work matters. I've changed things, moved people, and made the world better. And yet here you are, alone on your rooftop, monologuing to a shadow. Just needed a break from the noise. The noise that you asked for. Part of the job. And it's a damn good job. I mean, come on, this? He gestured to the skyline, the stars, the empire he'd built. This is the dream. No scandals, no breakdowns, no mysterious caveats. I love it. He walked over to the bar and poured himself another drink. He didn't offer me one, of course. "So why are you here? Trying to shake me up, waiting for the cracks?" "No. Just checking in. Most people don't last this long. You're a rare breed, Eli." "You don't seem happy about that." "Oh, I'm always happy. But you strike me as a man who's read too many headlines and believed them all." "You think I'm a fraud?" "No, I think you're a mirror. People see in you what they want to believe is possible. They mistake visibility for virtue, repetition for truth." "And what do you see?" "An expiration date." He laughed too loudly. "You're so full of it. You show up after 10 years just to throw shade? I thought you'd at least be clever." I leaned in slightly. "And I thought you'd be more grateful. You asked to be remembered. You didn't say how or for what, or for how long before it became unbearable." He went quiet then, just a flicker. The first crack barely noticeable. "I can handle it." "For now." We stood in silence for a moment. "Can I tell you something, Eli?" "Go ahead, you're clearly dying to." "I've met kings and killers, prophets and psychopaths. You know what they all had in common?" He didn't answer. "They all thought they were in control. They all thought the story was theirs. that they were the one writing it. And they weren't? I turned my head and met his gaze. They never are. Another silence. Longer this time. And with that I made my departure swiftly. Only the soft sound of my laughter remained, curling in the night air like smoke. Fame doesn't rot from the outside. It decays from within. It wasn't one moment. That's what people always get wrong. They think there's a snap, a single headline, a tweet that brings it all crashing down. But no. With Eli, it began quietly. A hesitation here, a forced smile there. The first sign? He stopped responding to fans. No more late-night live streams, no more surprise messages of encouragement. He was tired, he said. Burnout, understandable. They forgave him. Then came the interviews. Shorter, colder, clipped with defensiveness. He contradicted himself, lashed out at a podcast host who pressed too hard, accused a journalist of twisting his words. Still they clapped, still they adored him. But I could feel the shift. Fame doesn't just give. It expects. It demands. And when you stop feeding it, it turns. The fan base splintered. Some defended him. He's overwhelmed. Others turned. He's changed. And the worst ones? The ones who loved him most became angry that their God had grown distant. The paranoia crept in. I saw it in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. That flicker, that doubt. He stopped going out without security. He stopped going out at all. Then came the break-in. A fan, obsessed, delusional, certain that they were meant to be together, made it into his home. Eli wasn't hurt, but something broke inside him that night. He moved. Vanished from the public for weeks. When he reappeared, he was thinner, louder, and harder. He accused the media of betraying him. Sued an ex-employee for leaking emails that never existed. Claimed a late-night host mocked him unfairly. The segment was gentle, honestly, but Eli saw betrayal in every laugh. The internet turned. Memes cropped up. Old clips were recontextualized. Think pieces titled, "Was Eli Morgan always this weird?" started trending. Documentaries were rushed into production, but now they came with sinister music under the voiceovers. He was unraveling in real time, and the final thread was so heartbreakingly simple. He went to a fan event unannounced, just showed up. No security. Said he wanted to reconnect. Instead, he got swarmed, screamed at, groped, and cornered. Someone pushed him, and he panicked. A bottle was thrown. Eli grabbed a camera operator's boom mic and swung. One man, an assistant producer, fell, cracked his skull on the pavement. Dead on impact. Eli stood over him, mic in hand, blood on his face, surrounded by hundreds of recording phones. It was quiet for 2 seconds. Then the screaming started. Oh, and the trial for him was a circus, of course it was. They dragged him in wearing designer cuffs and an expression so carefully blank it looked sculpted. His team, what was left of them, issued prepared statements, begged for empathy, blamed stress, trauma, and the pressures of celebrity. No one cared. The footage was clear. The headlines were better. Eli Morgan kills devoted fan in brutal rage. Even though it was a cameraman. It wasn't accurate, but it was true enough. The prosecution didn't need to work hard. They painted him as a narcissist and a cult leader without a cause. Said he courted worship like oxygen, and when he didn't get it, he snapped. Oh, and the public ate it up. Every post, every tweet, every quote he'd ever given was dissected and twisted. The same words that once made him beloved were now used to prove how dangerous he was. Fan theories turned into courtroom arguments. Parody accounts became sources. Law professors gave TED Talks titled The Eli Morgan Effect. He became a cautionary tale before the verdict was even read. And when it was, guilty, of course. Not just of manslaughter, of moral failure, of cultural betrayal, of letting them believe in something. He was sentenced to 25 years, but truly they just wanted him gone. And yet he didn't disappear. No, that was the most exquisite part. His name lived on, and textbooks included his rise and fall in media studies. Documentaries turned out in high def. His face, stylized and hollow-eyed, became a stencil on alley walls next to slogans like, "Don't be an Eli." It was legacy, all right. It was exactly what he asked for. To be remembered, and remembered he was. But not as a hero, as a warning. And in a cell far from the city skyline, thick behind glass and concrete silence, Eli Morgan watched himself become legend. Not the kind with parades, the kind with PSAs. He didn't scream, he didn't speak, he just sat, breathing and watching. And I waited. Not to gloat. Not yet. That comes next. It was the kind of silence that sinks. No guards moved, no radios crackled. The hall outside his cell stretched long and empty, lit by flickering strips of tired fluorescence. Time didn't pass here, it just settled. Eli Morgan sat hunched in the corner of his cot, still breathing, though just barely. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something that wasn't there, or maybe something that wouldn't leave. He wouldn't speak anymore. Hadn't for months. Maybe years. But I was there. I stood just beyond the frame of his vision, in the place where shadows gather, where no one's watching. No cane tonight. No coat. Just presence. The idea of me bleeding into the edges of the room. I watched him. Watched the twitch of a finger. The hollow motion of a jaw clenched too long. The way his body curled in on itself, like it was trying to disappear. The world still spoke his name. Students still debated him. Journalists still speculated. A new play had just opened in London. Morgan, a minimalist two-act tragedy in grayscale. He was eternal now, and he knew it. His fingers trembled, his breathing quickened just slightly as if he sensed something. A shift in the air, a prickle on the back of his neck, the faint, impossible pressure of eyes where no eyes should be. Then, just once, he flinched. Not a sound, but at the space between sounds. At the moment just after silence, where something else has crept in. It started softly. A laugh. Not loud, not close, not human. Just there. A curl of sound on the edge of perception. Something felt more than heard, like a memory of laughter. The kind that lives in dark corners of old rooms, the kind that lingers behind your teeth when you've just won something no one else knows you were playing for. Oh, how I revel in thy laugh. Eli shuddered. He didn't look up, and didn't need to. He knew. And I stayed in the dark, laughing where I belong. Where I wait. Where I watch. Waiting for the next name that is already beginning to whisper itself into the walls and call me for another deal. My name's Jack Harlan. I'm a ranger. Not the kind with a smile on a brochure or a patch made for tourists. I don't run nature walks or give speeches about biodiversity. That ain't my section. I work deep. Places that don't get cell reception. No paved roads. Hell, half the time, no marked trails. The kind of woods that still feel old. Mean, even. I've been out here since I was 18. I'm 45 now. That's 27 years in the same unforgiving stretch of Appalachia. Most folks don't last 5. And those that do, they're either too stubborn to leave, or they've seen something that makes going back to a normal life impossible. I know where I fall. You hear the phrase, "the woods are alive," tossed around by folks trying to sound poetic. Let me tell you something. They are. But not in the way they mean. Trees don't whisper your name because the wind is playing tricks. They whisper because something knows you're there. I've logged things that no rational person would believe. Things with too many eyes. Things that don't leave tracks. Things that leave too many. Whole areas where the sound just dies. You'll be walking, talking, and then nothing. No birds, no insects. Like the world is holding its breath. That's when you leave, slowly. Don't run. Running draws the wrong kind of attention. I've seen what happens to people who forget that. You see, that's the problem these days. People don't respect the wild. They come out here with their ultralight backpacks and Instagram pages, thinking the woods are just another aesthetic. Something to conquer. Something to tame. It ain't. It never was. The forest doesn't care about your self-discovery. It doesn't care about your phone, your plans, or how many survival videos you watched online. It cares about one thing: whether or not you belong. Most of the time, the answer's no. I've found what was left of people who thought otherwise. Folks who wandered off trail, chasing a strange sound or a glimpse of something they couldn't explain. Some of them were torn apart. Others looked like they were trying to crawl inside out. Like they were trying to escape themselves. You stop asking questions after a while. You just log it, burn it, and hope it doesn't come back. There's rules we follow out here. Real ones. Not the ones laminated on safety cards. We follow rules like, don't follow lights that move against the wind. If you hear your name and no one's around, don't answer. Don't even look in the direction it came from. If your compass spins 3 times in a row, leave. Right then, no matter what you're doing. Tower protocol says 2 rangers, always, no exceptions. You go alone, you go crazy. Or worse, you go missing. And not the kind of missing where people find your pack 6 miles off trail. I mean the kind where there's no trace. Like you were never born. I've had 9 partners in 27 years. 3 transferred, 2 quit. 4 are dead. That last one. We never recovered his body. Just his boots. And a trail of blood that ended at the foot of a staircase that wasn't there the day before. But that's another story. My new partner showed up last week. Mason Hale. 20 years old. Still got the bright eyes and cocky grin. Walks like he thinks nothing can touch him. Talks too much. Asks questions like he wants answers. That'll change. This place has a way of stripping the noise out of a man. Mason ain't seen anything yet. Not really. Just the stories, just the warnings. The unease. He still thinks I'm being dramatic when I double lock the tower door at night and hang salt lines by the windows. But the woods will show him. They always do. Out here, survival isn't about strength. It's about respect. Caution, memory. You forget the rules, you disappear. You remember them. You might just live long enough to wish you hadn't. And tonight feels wrong. The first few days with Mason were quiet. Too quiet, almost. He asked a lot of questions, but none of them were the right ones. Wanted to know about bears, how far the radio signal reached, if we ever had to chase off meth heads or lost kids. I answered when I felt like it. Let the rest hang in the air. I could tell he was trying to impress me. Kept dropping lines about his wildlife courses, survival training. Sometime he helped rescue a drunk hiker near Shenandoah. That's fine, let him talk. Better he get it out early before the force teaches him to shut up. We ran perimeter checks, logged fallen trees, checked camera traps. I walked slow and steady. Mason bounced around like a damn Labrador. He kept playing music on his phone the first day. I didn't say anything. Just looked at him once the last time. Next day, no music. He asked about the salt I hang by the window towers. Asked what happened to the guy who had the post before him. I told him the truth. He broke protocol. That shut him up for a while. Nights were calm, mostly. Wind in the trees, radios popping with static. Mason dozed off early, boots still on. Sprawled out like he hadn't learned yet how fast you might need to move out here. I didn't sleep much. I rarely do. I sat by the radio, flipping through the bands. Static. Weather, silence. Then Channel 6 cracked open. Just a whisper, just one word. Soon. The call came in just after midnight. I was at the desk logging the day. We'd moved 2 camera traps, tagged a deer carcass near the North Ridge, and checked the salt lines around the tower. Routine stuff. Mason was already asleep on the cot. A half-eaten protein bar on his chest, boots off, arms thrown wide like he didn't have a care in the world. He still slept like someone who never had to wake up fast. The radio crackled once, then again, longer this time. A woman's voice came through, faint and warbled. Just one line. Hello? I'm lost. Please, can anyone hear me? Mason stirred, sat up and rubbed his eyes. Did you hear that? He asked. I heard it, I said, already turning the dial, trying to clean up the signal. It was on Channel 4, local band. No reason anyone should be on it that late unless something had gone real wrong. Should we respond? He asked, reaching for the mic. No, I said, sharper than I meant to. Not yet. He gave me a look like I just told him the sun didn't come up anymore. Jack, what if she's actually out there? She might be, which is exactly why we don't go in blind. I stood up, grabbed the thermal scope and flashlight. Pack up. We'll do a sweep, my way. We got our gear together and left the tower. We moved fast but quiet. Mason was jumpy and kept flashing his light in every direction, stumbling over roots. He hadn't learned how to walk the woods at night yet. It was foggy, and something about the silence felt wrong. No frogs, no owls. Just the crunch of boots on damp earth and Mason's breathing, shallow and uneven. 15 minutes in, we hit a split in the trail where the pines grow in close and crooked. No sign of anyone. No tracks, no disturbed brush. Just that same voice again, coming through the radio. "Please, I'm scared. I can't move. Someone help me." Same tone, same timing, not a single word out of place. Mason froze. "She's close." I scanned the woods, then lowered my flashlight. "She ain't." He turned toward me. "How do you know?" "Because I logged that voice 4 years ago. Same words, same pauses, down to the breath between sentences. It's a recording. Something is playing it." He didn't say anything for a while after that. Just turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. Then he looked at me and said, quiet now, like the woods were listening, "What the hell is out there?" I didn't answer. Some things you gotta learn on yourself. The fog had thickened on the walk back, curling low around our boots like it didn't want us to leave. The forest was beautiful in the way a blade is. Smooth, gleaming, made for damage. Pines rose like black spears into the night, their needles slick with dew that caught the moonlight in flashes. Every so often, a branch cracked somewhere out past the trail. We didn't speak, just walked, fast but careful, radio silent. Mason stayed close behind me now. He wasn't looking around as much. A quarter mile from the tower, we passed a clearing where the trees bent away from the center like something big had pressed outward and left. I didn't stop to examine it. Some things are better seen in daylight, if they're still there. By the time the tower came into view, rising above the trees like a rusted needle, I could feel Mason's pace quicken behind me. His breath caught when the floodlight clicked on, motion triggered. It lit the clearing below with a pale cone of light. The tower always looked strange from a distance. 80 feet of steel legs and welded panels standing in the middle of nowhere, like someone just dropped a radio station into the woods by accident. There's nothing elegant about it, just function stacked on top of paranoia. Inside, we climbed the stairs fast. The metal creaked under our weight, loud, hollow sounds that carry farther than you like. I bolted the hatch shut behind us. The main floor ain't much. Desk, comms panel, 2 bunks, a gear wall, and a window in each direction. A little heater ticks in the corner. It smells like oil and dust. We've got 1 working camera feed per wall, each hooked to an old monitor that flickers when it rains. Under the floor is a hatch to the storage level. Backup fuel, dry rations, medical packs, and enough ammo to make a point if we need to. There's also a locked cold locker, bolted and lined with steel. It ain't for food. Above us, there's a loft barely big enough to stand in. Just a spotlight mount, a pair of binoculars, and a chair that's probably older than I am. It ain't cozy, but it's safe, and that's all that matters. Mason dropped into the desk without a word. I stood for a while, watching the monitors. North, south, tower base, tree line. Nothing moved. But that didn't mean we were alone. Out here, stillness doesn't equal peace. Sometimes it's just waiting. The heater clicked on with a tired whir, and the tower filled with that warm, dusty scent of old wires and baked metal. Outside, the wind scraped through the pines like a whisper trying to find a voice. Mason had finally gotten his color back. He was sitting sideways in the chair, legs stretched out, turning a carabiner over in his hands like it held answers. "You ever get used to that?" I glanced up from the logbook. "Used to what?" "That... whatever the hell that was." He scratched his head, then caught himself. "I mean, I know you said it wasn't a person, but it sounded like one. And if I hadn't had you there..." "You did." I cut him off. "Yeah, but..." He let the carabiner drop onto the desk with a soft clink. It just messes with your head, you know? I didn't answer. The heater clicked again. After a few seconds, he sighed and leaned back, looking out the east-facing window. The fog had started to thin, but the trees still looked too still, like they were listening. You ever think about leaving? Thought about it once. Back in '03. What changed? Didn't leave. That made him smirk a little, even if it didn't last long. He went quiet again. The tower creaked softly. Somewhere below, a bird, or something close to one, let out a single low call. One note, no follow-up. I closed the logbook and leaned back in my chair. All right, rookie. Let's go over the rules. Mason groaned. Ugh, again? Damn right again. You freeze out there, I need to know you'll default to something smarter than panic. So, 1 through 5. Go. He rolled his eyes but sat up straighter, rubbing his hands together like he was prepping for a test he hadn't studied for. Okay, rule 1. He paused. If you find a trail that's not on any map, don't follow it, even if it looks fresh. Especially if it looks fresh, I corrected. Right, especially. He took a breath. Rule 2. If you see a random staircase in the woods, whatever you do, don't touch it. I gave him a nod. Rule 3. If an animal watches you without blinking, don't acknowledge it. Doesn't matter what it looks like. It's not an animal. It wants permission. Good. Rule 4. He scratched the back of his neck. Leave an offering at the stone pile near East Ridge on the last day of the month. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it was yours. I raised an eyebrow. You got something picked out for next week? He shrugged. Thinking about giving it my lighter. Noted. Rule 5. Mason hesitated. If you hear something walking on the roof during a clear night, turn off the lights and wait it out. I leaned forward just a little. Why? His voice dropped, like saying it too loud might matter. Because it only climbs down if it knows you're awake. We sat in silence for a beat. The tower groaned again. Not bad, I said finally. You're getting there. Mason gave a half smile. Gold star? No, you get to live another week. The tower was quiet, except for the soft buzz of the monitors and the low, steady ticking of the heater. Outside, the woods were wrapped in that late-night silence that never sits right. Not quite peaceful, not quite still. Just waiting. I was at the desk, finishing the log entry from the mimic incident. Mason was in the corner, half asleep with his boots off, flipping a field knife in his hand, point to palm, like it gave him something to focus on. Then the radio snapped to life. A soft burst of static first, then a voice, old, low, and close enough to feel like it was inside the room with us. Don't go down tonight, Echo 3. He's hungry. Mason froze. His eyes went wide and found mine. I leaned forward and dialed through the channels. Nothing else came through. Channel 6 was dead. Mason cleared his throat. That was... who was that? I didn't look at him. Just wrote down the time, the words, and the channel in the log. Don't worry about it. Jack, come on, that wasn't Control. No, it wasn't. Then who the hell? Sometimes people use old channels to get messages out. You think that was a person? No, but it used to be. Mason didn't say anything after that. Just sat back in his chair, eyes fixed on the radio like it might speak up again. Morning came slow, with gray light bleeding through a layer of low cloud cover. Fog still clung to the ground, not as thick as the night before, but heavy enough to blur the edges of things. We geared up in silence. Mason didn't bring his usual banter, and I didn't ask if he was okay. It was better he stayed quiet. It gave him space to start listening to the woods the way I needed him to. We headed north, toward Camera Trap Echo N7, the one we'd placed a few days back after reports of low-frequency humming in the area. The trail was tight and uneven, lined with slick rock and thorns that always seemed to reach out more than they should. About half a mile in, Mason stopped dead. "Jack, look." Up ahead, a cluster of trees, thick old pines marked with gouges, deep vertical claw marks that started at least 10 feet off the ground and ran down into the bark like something had dragged itself down. No bear did that. I didn't say it out loud. Could be from the last storm. Could be. Lock it, tag it, don't get close. We pressed on. Camera N7 wasn't where we left it. We found the mounting bracket first, twisted and bent, hanging from a nail still lodged in the tree. The camera itself was 10 feet away, shattered face down in the dirt. The lens had been cracked from inside the housing, like someone had reached in and punched out. I crouched next to it and picked it up carefully. The battery was gone. Not drained, just gone. Like someone had slid it out and taken it with them. There's no tracks, no prints, no drag marks, nothing. The forest was silent again. That same dry quiet from the night before. Then came the sound, low, steady, and wrong. A faint droning, like someone humming through a wall, but it had no direction. Just around us. Mason looked at me unsure, waiting for a cue. I just nodded slowly. Null zone. He took a step back. We didn't speak again until we were a mile out. Just kept our heads down, boots steady, checking over our shoulders just a little too often. By the time we hit the edge of the tower territory, the fog had started to drift back in. Thin sheets rolling in low, the kind that barely move like they're watching. I kept one hand near my radio and the other on my sidearm, just in case. Mason was lagging behind a few steps when I realized he'd stopped. I turned. He was staring off the trail back toward the trees we'd just passed through, eyes locked. I stepped closer. You see something? He didn't answer at first, just kept looking. Then real quiet, like he didn't trust his own voice. You were just down there. No, I wasn't. He shook his head slowly. You were. I saw you like 20 yards off the trail. You said my name. I moved in front of him, blocking his view of the tree line. I've been in front of you the whole hike. I know, I just... He looked back again, like whatever he saw might still be there. It looked exactly like you. Same jacket, same walk. It was you, I swear it. Did it say anything else? No, just my name, twice. You answer? He hesitated, jaw clenched. Yeah, I waved at it. I looked past him, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. Mimic. Not the same kind as before. Mason didn't say anything. He just looked shaken in a way I hadn't seen yet. Not fear exactly, but recognition. The realization that this place doesn't just scare you, it uses you. The fog was thicker than anything I'd seen in months. Heavy, low, rolling in from nowhere and everywhere at once. We'd been hiking the perimeter loop for an hour, and by now it felt like walking through gauze. The kind that clings to your skin and deadens sound. I could see maybe 6 feet in front of me. Mason was a shadow ahead, too far, so I called out. Close the gap. He slowed down until I could see the full outline of him again. His boots crunched softly in the damp dirt. We didn't speak after that. The quiet felt like a pressure in my ears. Something was wrong with the woods. At some point during our trek, Mason and I switched places and I took the lead. I kept my hand near my sidearm and my eyes on the trail, or what was left of it. Then, through the white wall of mist, something started to take shape. I saw angles, lines, straight where nothing in the forest was straight. I stopped cold. Mason nearly bumped into me. There it was, a staircase. We were already too close by the time I saw it. Less than 5 feet, maybe 4. It rose out of the earth like a splinter punched through skin. 12 steps. Old wood, but clean. No moss, no dirt, not even dust. It wasn't built here. It arrived. No reason for it to be here, no trail connected to it, no structure nearby. Just steps leading up to nothing, up into the gray. I didn't speak right away, I just stared. The fog didn't touch it. That was the first thing I noticed. It curled around it, sure, but it didn't settle on it. Like even the fog knew better. Then I said it, quiet and serious. Rule 2. Mason didn't answer. If you see a staircase in the woods, you don't touch it. I kept my eyes on the structure, backing up slowly, turning to the left. You don't climb it. You don't test it. You don't think about what's at the top. You log it, and we move. I pulled out my logbook, hand steady. Mason stayed quiet beside me. I drew the shape, marked the location, and closed the book. Then I turned and started to move. I counted 10 steps before I noticed Mason wasn't following. I turned back. He was still staring at the staircase. Just staring. Mason. He jumped a little, like he'd just woken up. Then he followed, quick and quiet. We didn't speak the rest of the way back. We made it to the tower just before nightfall. The fog clung to the base of the supports, rolling in slow, fat waves beneath the floodlights. It looked like the ground was breathing. I bolted the hatch behind us, checked the monitors. Nothing but mist and grainy silhouettes of trees. I did a quick perimeter call to control. No response, not that I expected one. Mason took the kettle off the tiny stove, poured 2 tin mugs of coffee, and passed one to me without saying a word. That was fine by me. Silence is kind of a safety out here. We sat for a while, the tower groaning as the steel cooled and settled. Outside, the wind moved through the trees in slow sighs. Then finally, Mason broke the quiet. "Why stairs?" he asked. I looked at him. He wasn't asking sarcastically. His voice was low, serious. He stared into his cup like the question had been gnawing at him the whole way back. I didn't answer right away. Just took a long sip and let the silence stretch. And then I leaned back in the chair, rubbed my jaw, and said, "You ever hear about Ranger Bell?" He shook his head. "Yeah, makes sense. People don't really talk about it much out here. If you ask anybody else about the stairs, you're met with a cryptic answer and a stern talking to. We aren't supposed to talk about him at all, but I'll fill you in on a little to keep you safe. Ranger Bell did 2 decades on the North Line. A real woodsman. Grew up out here, could track coyotes through river rock. Smart and careful. The kind of guy you'd actually want watching your 6. I paused. Ranger Bell touched one. Mason looked up. Wasn't trying to be stupid. The same as today. The fog was bad. He didn't see it until he was right on top of it. Reached out, just brushed the underside of the first step with the back of his hand. "What happened?" Mason asked, voice tight. "Nothing. At first. But when he pulled his hand back, it wasn't there anymore." Mason blinked. "What?" "Gone. cut off clean at the wrist. No blood, just absence. Like it was never attached to him in the first place. Good grief. The thing is, he didn't even feel it happen. It said it was like blinking and realizing your hand was missing. Just a phantom ache. The stump was smooth, like glass. Like he never had a hand in the first place. Mason looked pale now. His fingers gripped the mug tighter. I watched him a moment, then continued. You ever hear about what happened to Louisa Croft? She worked Fire Tower 4, South Ridge, 3 years ago. He didn't answer. She climbed one. Got a call in the early afternoon about a staircase spotted near Red Hollow. Figured it was a prank. Decided to go check it out herself and didn't report it until after. She knew the rules and decided not to follow them. She actually climbed it? Every step. Said the air got thinner the higher she went. Said the trees looked flatter. Said she started to hear voices near the top. She got back to the tower and radioed it in. Claimed she was fine. I sipped the last of my coffee. She was dead 4 hours later. Mason didn't move. Autopsy said blood vessels in her eyes ruptured. Every single one. Pupils flooded. Skull pressure like she'd been pulled out of an airplane at altitude. Blood filled her eyes and ran down her cheeks like tears. The doctors, the autopsy, coroner, none of them knew what the cause was. But we know. She didn't follow the rules. Mason stared at the floor, pale now, real pale. You ask why Rule 2 exists. That's why. I stood and moved to the window. The fog was so thick that it looked like the tower was floating. These things, they're not stairs. They're bait. Some kind of trap, maybe a test, I don't know. I just know that whatever put them there wants you to touch them, wants you to step on them. That's the invitation. Mason was silent. I didn't expect a follow-up and didn't want one. I dropped the empty mug in the sink and sat back down with my logbook. I looked back at him and watched him a few seconds longer. You good? He nodded, but his eyes didn't move from the floor. I stood and walked back to the desk. Behind me, I heard the words come out low, unsteady. Jack. I turned halfway and waited. He didn't look up when he said it. I touched it. Silence. I didn't mean to, he went on, fast now, like he had to get it all out before I could stop him. I didn't even think. I was just close, and you were already walking away, and I... He shook his head. It was just one step. I didn't go up. I just put my hand on it. My stomach went cold. How long? 2, 3 seconds tops? Did it do anything? He hesitated. It felt like it pulsed, like it knew I was there. I shut the logbook. Why didn't you tell me out there? I was scared, and I thought maybe nothing would happen. I stepped past him and locked the hatch for the 3rd time that night. Something always happens. I turned off the main light, left only the red glow lamp humming in the corner. Outside, the fog was thicker than I'd ever seen it. The floodlight barely pierced 5 feet. Mason sat frozen in the chair, breathing shallow, staring out the window like he was expecting the trees to start moving. I didn't say anything else because it was already too late. The fog pressed in around the tower like a slow tide, curling over the floodlights and swallowing the tree line. Even at full power, the lights only punched a few feet out before being smothered. I hadn't seen fog like that since '07. That year, we lost 3 rangers in 2 nights. Never found them. Not even their boots. Mason was curled in the corner near the heater. He hadn't said much since his confession. Couldn't blame him. I didn't say much either. Words wouldn't help now. I kept my eyes on the monitors, flickering grayscale feeds of fog and shadows. Nothing moved. That was the part that worried me. No birds, no wind, not even the usual creaks of the tower. Just stillness. At 12:17 a.m. it started. A knock. It came from below, not loud, just 2 soft taps on the steel hatch. Clean, slow. Mason sat upright like he'd been shocked. I didn't move. A knock again. I stood across the room and killed the main lights. The red low lamp hummed to life, casting everything in a blood-warm haze. Then I crouched by the radio desk and spoke low. Rule 5. Mason nodded, pale. If you hear something above or below during a clear night, turn off the lights and wait it out. That's right. We didn't speak. The third knock never came. Instead, a voice rose from beneath the tower. It was too clear, too sharp. Jack! It was Mason's voice. But Mason was 2 feet away from me, breathing shallow, staring at the hatch. The voice came again. Jack, it's me. I found something. Come look. My mouth went dry. I moved to the monitor that faced the base of the tower. Static. Then, for just a second, something cut through the grain. A shape. Human-like. Head tilted slightly too far to the side, shoulders hunched, no flashlight. Just standing still at the base, staring up. Then it spoke again, softer now. Jack, you said not to go alone. Mason's hand reached toward his flare gun. I grabbed his wrist firm. Another voice came through the wall, this time from the opposite side of the tower. Hey, Jack, Mason here. You awake? I froze. That one sounded like me. Perfect cadence, perfect rhythm. Like someone had recorded my voice from earlier in the day and was stitching the pieces together. Outside, something scraped along the metal legs of the tower. A slow dragging noise, like claws or bone. Then another knock, but this time it came from above. The roof. Mason looked at me eyes wide. I mouthed the words, "Don't move." The mimic downstairs was still talking. It didn't seem to care that we weren't answering. I think I dropped my radio, it said casual. Mind if I come up? Then it laughed. My blood went cold, but not because of the sound. It wasn't human enough for that. But because it didn't know how to laugh. It's like it was trying, like it was guessing. And it was getting closer. The footsteps on the stairwell now, bare and deliberate, metal creaking under weight that didn't match the stride. The radio clicked to life. Mason, please open the door. I'm scared. It was the woman's voice from the first night. Mason started to shake. The monitor feed to the north flickered, and for a moment I saw 2 figures now, both standing. One looked like Mason, the other like me. No movement, just watching. The knock on the roof came again, slower and heavier. Turn off the backup lights. Mason hesitated, then did it. We sat there in the darkness, barely breathing. The red lamp hummed off. The fog outside seemed to lean closer to the glass. And the tower held its breath. The knock stopped. No footsteps on the roof, no voices outside, just stillness. And sometimes that's worse. I moved slow, one hand on my blade, the other checking the lock on the roof hatch. Still sealed. The steel was cold to the touch. Too cold, like something had sucked the heat out of it. Then, all at once, the monitors blinked out. No warning, no flicker, just black screens. Power's gone, Mason said. His voice was tight. Controlled panic. Backup grid? Shouldn't it have kicked in already? It hadn't. I crossed the cabinet and opened the emergency kit. pulled out the flare gun, the whistle, the old emergency beacon we were never supposed to use, the one that lets out a high-frequency pulse tuned to disorient cryptid auditory patterns. Mason took the flare gun. I gave him 2 extra shells. No words. Then the noise started again. Not outside, but inside. Metal creaked beneath us. Not the structure, the floor. The trap door to the cold room groaned like something heavy had leaned against it from below. That hatch was locked. It was. Something scraped against the metal. Then 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I raised the emergency beacon and hit the trigger. The tower screamed, a long, high-pitched shriek like every window was about to shatter. The scraping stopped for about 2 seconds, and then something slammed into the cold room hatch. It bulged upward, denting the floor. "Move!" I barked. We dropped back just as the hatch exploded open, flinging the reinforced panel across the tower like it was made of tin. The thing that pulled itself through wasn't in a hurry. It stood, too tall, too long, hunched under the low ceiling. Its skin like dry bark stretched over a frame that wasn't built for standing upright. Its head turned too far to the side. No face at first, just skin, and then it peeled the features into place. My face. Not perfect, but close, off by degrees. The eyes were wide, too wrong, the mouth too flat, the voice. "Jack, you're tired." It said it in my voice, and it smiled, crooked, like it had learned what smiling meant, but not when to do it. I didn't speak. Speaking gives these things more to work with. Instead, I pulled the emergency flare from my belt, cracked it, and threw it straight at its chest. The light hit it hard. The thing screamed. Except it didn't. It opened its mouth and played the sound of a scream, like a recording on loop, and then it lunged. It was fast. I ducked under its first swing, and Mason fired his flare gun, point blank. It caught the thing in the shoulder and burned deep. The skin folded in on itself, peeling away in black, flaky strips. It lashed out and caught Mason in the ribs, sent him flying into the wall. I came in low with my steel blade and aimed for the throat. That's where these things store the sound. The mimicry root. You cut that and it bleeds silence. I drove the knife in deep. The thing staggered, mouth still moving, but no voice came out. Then it shrieked, not with sound, but with movement. Its entire body spasmed, limbs convulsed. Then it melted, not like wax, but like bark curling in a fire. Flaky black sheets falling to the ground, a hollow underneath. The mimic collapsed in on itself and twitched once. Then nothing. I turned to Mason and he was coughing hard but conscious. "That it?" "No." I pointed to the hatch. It had been forced open. Shit. 2 more out there, maybe 3. They're testing us. Outside, something scraped across the window. A familiar voice called out, "Jack!" It was mine. Again. Only this time it was laughing. The tower went dark after the first one dropped. No monitor feed, no buzz from the power grid. Just the red emergency lamp and the pulsing hiss of fog outside. Then nothing. Even the auditory alert was off. Mason crouched near the flare gun, eyes locked on the melted thing on the floor. His hands were trembling. I moved to the control panel. "Keep watch." The power hadn't blown. There was no surge. This was something else. Something deliberate. I popped open the floor panel and dropped to one knee. The backup grid battery switch had been tripped, clean and surgical, like someone had known where to hit it. I flipped the breakers hard, nothing. Switched to manual override and waited. A low hum started crawling up the walls. Lights flickered, monitors buzzed back to life. The heater didn't kick in, but I didn't need comfort, I needed eyes. The feed came through. Static at first, then slow-moving silhouettes. One shape moved across the north camera, tall, hunched and dragging something. Another walked into view on the south, upright and still. Me. The mimic didn't move for a long time. just stared into the lens. I stepped back from the monitors. 2 more outside. Mason didn't respond right away, just nodded. They're watching again? Always. I handed him a second flare and the dog whistle. Here's your crash course on mimics. Steel to the throat, fire if they're close, whistle if you need a second. It disrupts their auditory patterns. He nodded tighter this time. Outside, another voice floated from above. Jack! I walked to the window and peeked through the edge of the frame. There it was, me, standing by the ladder in the fog. My stance, my jacket, but off by a hair. I backed away and reached for the emergency beacon. Brace yourself, I said, and hit the switch. The shriek ripped through the tower, a high-frequency distortion designed for field incapacitation. Every window rattled, my molars buzzed. Then came the slam from above us. I looked up. Mason's hand tightened around the flare gun. The hatch groaned. The second mimic didn't enter slow. It dropped through the hatch like a bag of bones and scrambled to its feet mid-motion. Limbs wrong, face half-formed. It flickered between me and the woman's voice from the first night, like it couldn't decide which one worked better. And then it screamed. Not a sound, a blend. My voice, Mason's voice, her voice, laughing and crying at the same time, too loud and too wrong. It came at me first, fast. I ducked under its first swing, but it caught my shoulder on the follow-through. Not with a claw or a punch, just weight. A solid, blunt force like getting hit by a tree limb. I stumbled back, rolled, grabbed the whistle on my belt, and blasted it point blank. The mocker froze mid-stride. The auditory alert system didn't do much on these, but the whistle worked just fine. Its limbs jerked like a marionette, its skin began to ripple. Mason's face, then mine, then nothing. Just skin stretched over smooth bone. That gave me maybe 3 seconds. I pulled my knife, rushed in, slashed for the throat, but it snapped out of its stun quicker than I'd seen before. It twisted its arm backward, full rotation, no joint resistance, and grabbed my wrist. It gripped hard and bones creaked. Then it spoke with my voice, a whisper against my ear. You're going to fail him. I drove my forehead into its face hard. Something cracked and it let go. Mason shouted and opened fire, flare round direct to the chest. The mimic flinched, staggered, flames licking up its shoulder. It screamed again, but this time it copied me screaming, a sound I didn't think I've ever made, but there it was, low and panicked and wrong. The thing lunged again, this time for Mason. Arms out, twitching, one hand dragging like a broken limb. He tried to dodge, but it clipped him across the jaw and sent him reeling into the wall. I sprinted in low, hooked my arm around its neck, dragged the steel across its throat. The cut wasn't clean. It jerked and fought the blade like it didn't understand pain. Its hands clawed at my arms, her fingers too long, nails like glass. Mason recovered, grabbed his own knife and went for the legs. Deep stab to the thigh, twist and pull. The thing dropped, but it wasn't done. It started speaking again, faster now and jumbled. Pieces of old conversations. Bits of Ranger Bell's voice from training tapes, Mason's laugh, my instructions, or her cries. Don't go down tonight, Jack. Echo 3. Please help. You said not to go alone. Its throat wasn't even working right anymore, but it kept trying. Because that's what mimics do. They keep reaching, keep becoming, keep trying to fill the empty space inside them with pieces of you. I raised the flare and held it to the cut in its neck. Its skin split wider, smoke rising fast, black ichor bubbled to the surface, coating the floor. Finally, it went still. Then it collapsed in on itself, like bark curling in fire. Limbs folding wrong, skin turning to dry sheets that peeled away until nothing was left but scraps and soot. Mason slumped against the wall, breathing heavy. I heard a crying shriek pierce through the night and looked at the footage. The third mimic seemed to be running away. You good? I asked Mason. He wiped blood from his mouth and nodded. I think... I don't even know what to think. I got to my feet and looked at the wrecked room, shattered windows, burned floors, still smoking corpses. Yeah, I said. Welcome to the job. We spent the rest of the night cleaning up, trying to patch the tower shut as best we could in case that last mimic came back, but it seemed to be licking his wounds and wanting to live to fight another day. The sun broke through the fog as it was cutting its way in. It wasn't a soft glow. It came in hard, bright, blinding, and sharp-edged. For a second, I thought maybe it wasn't the sun at all, just light. Unnatural, but it kept rising, slow and steady, and the fog finally began to pull back. The forest returned in pieces. Branches, pines, dirt. Everything in place like nothing had happened. Like the woods were pretending again. The tower was quiet. Too quiet. No radio static. No wind. Just the faint hum of the power grid I'd rebooted and the creak of steel as the structure settled. Mason sat slumped against the far wall, elbows on his knees, eyes open but unfocused. I handed him a bottle of water. He took it but didn't drink. You sleep at all? He shook his head. Me neither. I checked the cameras. They got cut at some point in the night. All cables severed, lenses cracked, something had disabled them. I sat across from him and waited. Finally, he said, they knew our voices, how we looked. They always do. They knew how to move like us. They only get that good if you give them time. I thought I was ready for this job. You weren't. None of us are. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it. The shift. The part of you that breaks off after your first real encounter around here. The part you leave behind in the woods, whether you want to or not. He lost it, same as I had once. How many things are out here? I didn't answer at first. Just stared into the forest, watching the light cut across the canopy. More than you'll ever see, and fewer than you'll ever believe. Jack's log, entry 4387. Tower secured. Breach occurred during night hours. 2 entities neutralized, 1 on the run. Power restored. Casualties none. Damage significant. Rookie held the line. He'll make it. Maybe. The stairs are still out there. And they're not done with us.